Welcome back to Boring History for Sleep, where we gently drift into the forgotten folds of time and let the quiet rhythm of the past lull us into stillness. Tonight, we journey into a world cloaked in silence and shadow, where the fires flickered low in stone hearths and the wind curled around wooden shutters like a ghost from the woods. A world where nightfall came early and lingered long, where snow blanketed rooftops and silence wrapped itself around narrow alleyways and frostbitten hills. This is not a tale of kings or knights, not of grand battles or shining armor, but of something quieter, something colder, something more hidden. Tonight, we follow those who moved unseen through the medieval world, those who survived not with sword or shield, but with knowledge, patience, and the art of slipping through cracks in the world. Imagine yourself in a village where the day's last light fades behind distant trees and every footstep echoes on frozen earth. The people have gone inside, drawn curtains, bolted doors, and pulled woolen blankets around their shoulders. But you remain outside, wrapped in layers that trap the heat of your breath against your skin. Your boots crunch softly on snow. Your path is not straight, not hurried, but deliberate. You know which boards creak, which dogs bark, and which chimneys send up smoke. You are not here to be seen. You are here to pass through the night. In the medieval world, an assassin did not always look like the tales might tell. There was no black hood, no shining dagger. Sometimes there was only a quiet figure moving through the snow, a shadow behind the church, a breath on the back of your neck. Sometimes the weapon was silent. Sometimes it was a word spoken at the right moment, or a message slipped under a door. And the cold, oh, the cold was a presence all its own, more cruel than any rival. It seeped into bone, into the edges of thought. To survive a medieval winter was no small feat, but to survive it while remaining hidden, unseen, forgotten, it was an art all its own. Tonight, we walk beside those forgotten ones, those who blended into the stone and the wind, whose names were never written down, whose stories lived only in whispers and wary glances. We follow their paths through forest trails, frozen over through castles where the stones held secrets, and into villages where trust was a rare currency. Let the rhythm of their nights carry you, let the crunch of frost and the whisper of woolen cloaks slow your thoughts, and feel the world fade away into the soft falling snow of the past. This is Boring History for Sleep, and tonight we begin our journey into the coldest nights and the quietest lives of a world now forgotten. Daily life immersion. As the long shadows of evening folded over the snowbound valley, the assassin moved quietly along the edge of a narrow woodland path, not as a man seeking shelter, but as a shape woven from dusk and silence. Imagine him there, wrapped in thick layers of wool and darkened cloth, each piece worn and fraying from years of use and nights spent beneath open skies. The air sharp and cold enough to sting with every breath, and the forest standing tall and watchful around him. He knew these woods intimately, not from maps or tales, but from the rhythm of footfalls against frozen leaves, from the language of rustling branches, from the soft indentations of tracks. Half filled with snow and fading under the weight of time, he had no need for a compass. His guidance came from the wind, and the placement of stars from the slight curve of a slope that meant shelter nearby, or a hollow in the roots of an ancient tree that offered escape from the wind when the hours grew thin. This was not his first winter, nor would it be his last. He had survived dozens of such nights beneath the gaze of indifferent stars, sleeping in abandoned mills and ruined chapels, among the crumbled stones of old towers, and beneath the arching boughs of pine trees heavy with snow. The cold had become his companion, not an enemy, but a constant, a teacher that offered hard lessons in patience and preparation. He had learned how to layer cloth so that heat stayed close to the skin, how to find dry tinder even beneath ice, how to steal warmth from the very earth itself by carving shallow burrows and lining them with pine needles. The cloak he wore was stitched from the remnants of many others' faded browns and dull grays, patched together with thread pulled from worn seams. It smelled of wood smoke and old tallow of nights. spent beside the smallest fires that dared not flicker high enough to be seen from any road. He carried no grand banner, no sigil, no insignia, only the quiet signs of one who lived among shadows and moved like mist between the folds of the world. He carried no pack heavy with supplies. His tools were tucked into narrow belts and secret seams. A blade sharpened and oiled with care, a coil of twine wrapped in waxed cloth, a sliver of flint bound to a sliver of steel, and tucked near the warmth of his chest. His food was often little more than dried roots or crusts of bread hardened like stone, softened against the tongue with snow or held for hours in the palm, until they yielded to warmth. Each night was a lesson, and each day a test of memory and silence. He walked not to reach a destination, but to remain unseen to pass through the lives of others without stirring their dreams or leading behind the faintest breath of his presence. His roots were never the same twice he mapped them, not on parchment, but in the shifting tapestry of the landscape, noting each crooked branch, each stone that jutted like a tooth from the snow, each patch of lichen that suggested a hidden spring beneath the frost. He observed the world as others might observe a sacred text, finding meaning in the way icicles formed along the eaves of a hut in the way. A door hung slightly ajar in the way. Smoke rose straight or curled from chimneys to speak of wind, and who inside might be cooking, who inside might be. Alone the cold slowed everything. It hushed the world into a quieter version of itself, and in that hush he listened deeply. There were nights when he did not sleep at all, but sat nestled between the thick roots of trees, his body still, and wrapped in silence, eyes half-lidded, ears tuned to every creak of branch and every gust of wind. He measured time by the movement of clouds, by the length of shadows cast by distant fires, by the changing chorus of nocturnal creatures who stirred only in the deepest parts of the night. His training had not come from books or structured lessons. It had come from observation, from repetition, from failure and pain. And slowly, earned insight, he had been shown how to melt snow in his palms, before drinking it, how to walk so that no twig snapped, how to slow his heartbeat with breath alone, how to move with such stillness that even the deer in the clearing would not lift their heads. He had learned that warmth was not just something built from fire, but something created in stillness and breath, held beneath layers of cloth in the curled shape of a body, aligned to preserve heat in the memory of touch and the patience of ritual, each motion purposeful, each fold of the blanket precise, each corner of the cloak wrapped tightly at the same angle every night, until it became a kind of ceremony, a meditation on survival. His hands were often raw, cracked from wind and ice, but they remained precise and capable. He carved tools from bone, whittled slivers of wood into pegs and wedges, sharpened metal against stone, while sheltered beneath overhangs. He mended seams by firelight, using thread pulled from the linings of abandoned garments always, conserving, never wasting every resource, measured and stored for future need. In the silence of his evenings, he listened to the murmurs of villages, nearby heard through cracks in wooden shutters, the laughter of children, the soft tread of boots. Across snow, the quiet songs hummed beneath breath as candles were extinguished and families settled into sleep. He marked these rhythms, learning which homes housed hunters, which ones kept dogs, which ones remained dark for too many nights, and likely stood empty. He avoided comfort with the diligence of a priest avoiding sin. He knew that warmth could dull the senses, that too much food slowed the body, that a heavy blanket could tempt him to sleep too deeply, and so he lived within the narrow edge between need and deprivation. Just enough food, just enough rest, never enough to become complacent, never enough to lose the edge when snow fell heavy. He moved beneath it, his footfalls muffled by the thick blanket. His trail covered in moments, he wrapped his face in cloth to keep his breath from freezing against his beard, and he stepped carefully along the ridges and frozen banks where his weight would leave little trace. He welcomed these nights, for they favored his kind, for they turned the world into a dreamscape of silence and white, where those who moved recklessly became lost. He did not fear the wolves who howled in the distance, nor the owls who cried in the night. They were fellow travelers sharing the hours. Between dusk and dawn, each with their own needs and hungers, each moving according to instinct and caution, the wolves kept others indoors. The owls warned of motion. He understood them, and in return, they seemed to accept his presence, or at least tolerate it. By day, he sometimes crept into the outskirts of small hamlets, wrapped in rags, and stooped like a beggar, warming his hands over shared fires and listening to the gossip that flowed as freely as broth from steaming pots. He spoke rarely, and when he did, his voice was cracked and low, disguised to sound older or simpler, his eyes always watching, not with suspicion, but with quiet calculation. In barns and stables, he sometimes slept beside animals whose warmth was greater than that of any blanket. The gentle rise and fall of breath from oxen, the soft grunts of pigs, and the slow shifting of horses provided not only warmth, but a kind of rhythm, a lullaby of flesh, and presence that grounded him against the bite of isolation. His mind never rested fully. Even when his eyes closed, he thought in patterns, traced routes, memorized faces, counted supplies, and replayed events to find flaws or truths. Missed the night before he built strategies from habit and practiced thoughts as others, practiced prayers each repetition, deepening his readiness and his sense of purpose. He had learned to find water by the sound of drips beneath ice, to test snow for purity, to avoid those places where melting revealed rot or filth. He had learned to trust the birds who flew low before storms, and to read the wind. Through the movement of tree limbs and drifting snow, his senses were instruments honed by need. When he stood atop a ridge, watching smoke rise in the distance, he did not feel longing. He felt distance and clarity, the separation between himself and that life was wide and deliberate, and it offered him a kind of peace, not born from the longing, but from understanding his place. He was not meant to be known or seen. He was meant to exist just out of reach, just out of sight on the longest nights when the moon was hidden and the sky stretched black and endless above. He sometimes sat and allowed memory to drift, not of names or faces, but of sounds and scents, the way wet leather smells when drying, the sound of ice cracking on the river, the feel of fur-lined gloves pulled tight against the cold. The smallest things became the most vivid, the most essential. He did not miss a home, for he had never had one, not truly, and the idea of roots or kin felt foreign to him. His loyalty belonged to silence, to the cold, to the quiet places of the world where others did not look or listen. Deeply enough, he did not resent those who lived differently. He simply existed elsewhere. In a space between night and wind in the coldest hours, he would sometimes move just to feel the blood stir in his limbs, walking circles around ruined wells, or pacing slow loops in thickets where the snow lay softest, his breath steady and slow, his hands kept close to his body, his eyes always adjusting, scanning, sensing the shift in light or the sound that did not belong. This was how he lived, not as a man, but as something shaped by season and silence, by hunger and habit, by ritual and rhythm. He was not fast, but he was patient, not loud, but he was thorough, not strong, but he was enduring, and in this quiet enduring, he had become something more, something resilient and unbending and deeply known to the forest around him. He had survived more winters than most would dare to imagine, not through strength, but through softness, the kind of softness that yields before it breaks, the kind of stillness that watches rather than acts, the kind of silence that listens to the heart of the world and moves only when it must. And so as you rest now, let your thoughts drift to that cold, forgotten path beneath the trees where he walks still, a quiet figure wrapped in wool and memory, where each step is measured and each breath deliberate, where the wind does not chase him away but moves with him, gently carrying the past like snow on his shoulders. This is how he survived the coldest nights, not by fighting the cold, but by becoming its shadow, its student, its brother. He walked not to reach the end, but to continue the rhythm, and with every night passed, he lived more fully in the hush, between moments in the stillness where few dare to remain. A journey through silence. Cal's mission across the frozen spine kale in the frozen pass, the mission begins. Why spoke of the pass only when the fire burned low, and the wind outside had stilled, as if the mountains themselves were listening. It was a place the villagers did not mark on their maps, not because they did not know it, but because they preferred to forget it, a narrow, twisting vein of stone and ice, known only as the frozen spine, where storms were born and breath turned to ice in the lungs yet. This was where Cale walked quietly, with his cloak drawn tight around him, and his hood low against the bitter sky. Cale moved along the ridgeline like a shadow painted in grays, in silence his eyes, scanning the slopes above and below each step, placed with the precision of a man who knew that one slip meant not injury. But vanishing Cale had crossed many paths in his life, through deserts and ruins and broken cities, but nothing had the silence of the frozen spine. Nothing held its breath so deeply or watched so coldly, and Cale understood that here he must match that silence or be swallowed by it. There was no trail, only the memory of one faint signs carved into Cale's mind from a map he had once seen scratched onto the back of a wooden plate by a dying man in a cellar, and remembered. Ever since the map had not shown distances or landmarks, only danger written in angles and direction, and Cale followed it now with the trust of someone who had nothing else to follow and nothing else to lose. The wind came in bursts, rising through the gulches like something alive. Cale braced each time, crouching slightly, his cloak flapping against his legs, and his breath hidden behind thick wool. Cale's skin beneath the layers was red and raw from days of cold, and his fingers stiff around the leather strap that kept his knife close to his ribs. But he did not stop, not even when the snow blew sideways, or the sky disappeared behind clouds thick as wool. Cale was carrying something more fragile than parchment, and more dangerous than any blade sewn beneath his inner cloak was a thread of silk thin as a spider's leg dyed in dark ink, with a message only those trained in the old monastery would know how to read. It was meant to reach the Brotherhood before the moon rose, full before the mountain paths were sealed beneath walls of snow. Cale had not asked what the message said. It was not his place. He only needed to carry it, to survive with it, and to ensure no one else ever saw it at night. Cale dug hollows into the side of the slope beneath bent trees whose roots clutched stone like old fingers. He lined the space with pine needles and wrapped himself into the earth as if returning to it. And he did not light a fire, not once, not even when his teeth ached from the cold or his breath refused to warm his hands, because Cale knew that fire was not warmth. Fire was light, and light in these mountains drew attention from things older than memory. Cale survived these nights by listening to the wind. The rhythm of it told him where the drifts were moving, and where the ice had grown thin, and when something large moved nearby. Cale could hear the shift in the wind's voice, a strange echo that bounced off bone and stone sometimes. He heard the slow crunch of something far below him, pacing just beyond the edge of his knowing. Cale would freeze in place for hours, until only his thoughts moved, and then he would melt slowly into the shadows and disappear again. Cale did not sleep so much as drift. He learned to rest one part of his body at a time, to close his eyes, without surrendering his senses, to keep his fingers curled just enough around his blade to remember its weight, and he trained his body to accept hunger and cold, not as punishment, but as reminders that he was still present, that he had not yet failed. He passed the remains of others, sometimes not many, but enough. A cracked bone protruding from snow, a torn piece of cloth snagged on a thorn, and once the edge of a boot sticking from beneath a drift. Cale did not stop. He did not dig or pray. He only bowed his head once and kept walking, for he knew that they had not failed. They had only paused too long, or trusted the cold too little, and Cale would not repeat their ending during one long stretch, where the path narrowed to a stone shelf with only air on one side. Cale moved sideways, with his back pressed to the rock and his feet slow and sure, his breath shallow to keep balance. The wind screamed here, as if it remembered every name of those who had fallen. Cale did not answer it. Kale only kept moving his, shadow clinging to the mountain, as if he belonged to it. He saw no birds, no beasts, no tracks, only snow that fell straight and slow, and rocks buried beneath layers of silence. Kale moved through this like someone walking through memory, each step a repetition of the last, each moment stitched to the next by the thread of will that held him upright. Kale did not count hours or distance, only breaths taken without pain, only steps taken without slipping. Once Kale stopped in a cleft between two boulders where the wind did not reach. He chewed on dried bark soaked in herbs to fight the cold, and he closed his eyes to listen not to the world around him, but to the world within the sound of his blood, the soft crackle of cold muscles stretching the slow rhythm of heartbeats that told him he still had time. Kale did not speak, not even to himself. Silence was part of the journey, and he had become its student. He remembered. No warmth from childhood, no hearths, no embraces, only the cold of stone and the weight of expectation. Kale had not been born into this life. He had walked toward it one choice at a time, each step leading him farther from others until the quiet was all he knew. And when the cold came for him, it found him. Already waiting unafraid, Kale did not fear the cold, because the cold had shaped him into something it would not consume. As Kale crossed into the higher ridges, where snow no longer fell gently, but came in hard waves, he began to move in rhythm with it using the drifts as cover, and stepping only when the wind howled to hide his motion. He moved between shadow and snow, between rock and breath, always listening, always measuring the risk. Kale was not trying to outrun the storm. He was trying to walk within it, to become part of its rhythm. He marked his progress not by distance, but by the shape of stones and the curve of ridges by the way. The frost gathered on his sleeves and the weight of snow on his shoulders. Kale would stop and feel the ground for signs of weakness, digging lightly with a bone hook to test if the crust would hold, and when it cracked, he would step away without hurry and try. Again, Kale did not panic. Kale did not rush, because both would kill him quicker than the cold. In one narrow canyon, where the sun never reached and the ice hung from rocks like teeth, Kale passed a frozen waterfall and saw in its surface his reflection, not the shape of a man, but the blur of motion wrapped in fabric and time. And Kale studied it for a moment, not to admire or fear, but to remember that he was not made of smoke and fought alone. Kale was still flesh, and it would fail him if he let it. He continued on across ledges, too narrow for words, and beneath cliffs where avalanches waited to fall, and every movement carried the echo of finality. Kale did not flinch. Kale did not speak. Kale simply moved one foot in front of the other, wrapped in the belief that his silence was stronger than their weight, that his breath was more constant than the wind. And so the pass yielded to him, not with mercy, but with respect, as if the mountain had judged him and found him small enough to pass beneath notice. And Kale did not thank it. Kale did not kneel. Kale simply walked on, leaving behind no trail, no name, no sound, only the faint warmth of his body pressed into the snow where he had once paused, and that was enough. Kale and the monastery. A message in silence. Kale reached the lower slopes of the far side of the mountain pass just as eyes. The last light of the sun slipped behind the ice cliffs and turned the sky to silver. The monastery lay hidden within a valley below, invisible from any map or tower, its walls built into the stone itself, so that even in daylight it looked more like a wound in the earth than a place where men gathered. Kale stood at the edge of the descent, his breath low and steady, watching the clouds coil around the peaks above like slow creatures preparing to settle for the night. And he listened not for sound, but for change, for the subtle shift in the wind that meant something living had stirred. Kale did not move quickly down the slope. Instead, he placed each step with intention, following the shape of ridges and crevices that would shield his figure from the eyes of any who might still be awake below. The monastery kept few lights and fewer guards, for its defenses were silence and remoteness. But Kale trusted neither. He had learned long ago that quiet places often heard the loudest truths, and that even those who claimed to welcome messengers often feared the message more than the one who bore it as Cale approached the outer ring of broken pines that marked the final mile to the monastery. He paused beneath. A bent cedar its branches, heavy with frost, and he knelt in the snow not to pray, but to feel the cold against. His knees to ground himself in the moment, and to remind his body that stillness was more powerful than haste. He reached beneath his cloak, and checked the silk once more still. There still untouched a secret folded into a thread. Cale did not know what it carried, only that it had to reach the elder called Malor before the dawn of the third day. Cale remembered Malor from years past, though their meeting had been brief, a pale figure with clouded eyes and a voice that cracked like old timber, a man who had spoken only once, too. Cale, and had spoken of things Cale had not yet lived, as if his life were already written in frost upon stone, and yet Cale had never forgotten the face, nor the voice, and now he returned, not as a boy listening, but as a shadow carrying words meant to shift the world if spoken aloud. The monastery itself emerged from the snow. As Cale drew closer, not with grandeur or spires, but with quiet permanence, its stone worn smooth by wind and the slow fall of seasons, its windows narrow and dark, like the eyes of a creature that watched without blinking. Cale moved along the perimeter, testing the earth beneath each step until he found the small outcropping near the east wing, a ledge masked by a tangle of thorns and snow where old steps once led down into what had been the storage cellars. And Cale lowered himself into that darkness with the ease of one who had never known anything brighter than dusk within the tunnels. Cale moved by touch alone, his fingers grazing stone, his breath drawn in short, shallow patterns so that it would not echo each corner, remembered each turn already known from years ago when he had trained here, not as a student, but as an observer sent to learn and forgotten as easily as he had arrived. Now Cale moved not as a guest, but as something returning to its origin, a silence that had once been part of this place and now returned to complete its circle. Cale passed rooms once used for fermentation and storage, now hollow and filled with dust. He passed through antechambers that smelled of old ink and cracked parchment, through corridors where prayers had once been carved into the walls, only to be worn smooth by time and neglect. He did not stop to read them. Cale understood that words meant for gods often faded before the wind did, and that the only truth was that which one carried in silence. He emerged into a cloister garden open to the sky, where snow had gathered in the corners, and the remnants of herbs long dead still clung to frozen beds. Cale stood there for a moment, letting the chill touch his face, and he remembered long nights spent crouched behind those same columns, watching others practice rituals and disciplines he had never been invited to learn. Now he stood in the open, and no one called out to stop him. No alarm was raised. Cale moved as if the monastery itself had been waiting for him, as if his return were part of its breath. He found Malor in the high chamber, where the wind always hummed through the stones. The old man sat beside a brazier filled with coals, his eyes still pale, his hands wrapped in cloth, and he did not turn when Cale entered, only spoke his name, once not as a question, but as a statement, as if Cale had never left, and was simply late to his next lesson. Cale stepped forward, knelt, and withdrew the silk thread, placing it beside the coals, where its ink shimmered faintly in the heat, and Malor nodded without touching it. They did not speak of its contents. Cale did not ask, and Malor did not explain. They spoke instead of the storm above, of the wolves in the lower pass of the moss that no longer grew on the inner walls, and of a student who had gone missing last spring, whose body had never been found. Cale listened to each word, not for information, but for the rhythm of it, for the gaps between the phrases where the truth lived. Malor was old, but not blind, and Cale could feel the weight of things unspoken, pressing against the walls like snow ready to fall. Malor handed Cale a bowl of broth made from root and bone, thin and tasteless, but warm, and Cale took it without thanks, drinking slowly and letting the heat spread into his chest. Malor watched him the way an old hawk watches wind, and Cale felt that he was not being tested, but remembered, as if Malor were measuring the distance between what he had been and what he had become, and deciding quietly whether that distance mattered. When Cale finished the broth, he set the bowl down and rose without waiting for permission, and Maller did not stop him, only said the path beyond was still open for one more night, and that if Cale wished to vanish, he would need to do so before the snow sealed the outer gate again. Cale nodded once, pulled his cloak close, and left the chamber without looking back. The message had been delivered, and the silence behind him held no unfinished echoes. Cale moved again through the halls, this time passing monks in quiet robes, who did not meet his eyes. Some nodded, some pretended not to see him, but none spoke, and Cale understood that his presence was not a secret. Here it was simply accepted, like the cold, like the way wind found cracks in even the strongest walls. Cale was not a visitor. He was a presence that passed through, not welcomed nor refused, only observed and remembered. As Cale stepped once more into the cold of the outer courtyard, he paused beneath the old bell tower and looked up into its empty frame. Once it had rung with warnings and calls to prayer, but now it held only snow and silence. Cale did not mourn it, nor did he touch it. He simply passed beneath and kept walking down the slope toward the edge of the forest, where the trees waited without judgment. The way out was not the way he had entered. Cale knew that returning through the frozen spine would be suicide. Now the storm above had thickened the sky into lead, and the pass would already be buried beneath drifts as high as walls. But Cale had prepared for this. He had always known the way back would be different, and he followed the memory of an older path, a merchant trail lost to time that wound through deep gorges and silent valleys, untouched by roads or names. Cale walked not with haste, but with steadiness, his mind quiet, his body balanced. The silence of the monastery still wrapped around him like a second skin, and as he moved deeper into the trees, he began to feel the rhythm of the world return, the distant call of crows, the soft crunch of ice beneath branches, the sound of wind threading through pine like fingers through hair, and Cale listened to it all, absorbing it as he walked. He camped that night beneath a fallen tree, its trunk hollowed by years of decay, and he lined the interior with bark and moss and wrapped himself in silence. Cale did not light a fire. He warmed himself with breath and thought and memory, and he dreamed not of the monastery or the message, but of a distant road lined with torches and a face he could not quite remember. And when he woke, the dream was gone, and only the cold remained. Cale crossed frozen rivers, stepped lightly across ice that cracked beneath his weight, and moved without pause through valleys where no footprints remained. By morning, he passed a ruined tower swallowed by frost, and beneath its broken arches, he found the bones of a deer picked clean and frozen in place. Cale paused only long enough to draw a sigil in the snow, beside it not of mourning, but of memory. And then he moved on. He reached the edge of a village by the third dawn, one he had never visited, but had studied from afar. Cale watched it from a ridge, noting the placement of homes, the shape of fences, the smoke from chimneys, and the dogs that barked at nothing. And when night fell, he entered it not as a traveler, but as part of the wind, cloaked and hooded, and already forgotten by morning. Cale had passed through it like breath, leaving only the faint scent of pine and frost behind. The message was gone now, delivered and folded into the hands of those who would speak it aloud or bury it in stone. Cale did not know which, and he did not care. His role was never to shape the world, only to carry its whispers, to walk through places others feared, and to leave them quieter than before. Cale had become not a man, but a rhythm, a thread in the fabric of winter, and as he walked alone into the stillness of the next valley, he felt not tiredness, but calm. And so Cale moved on through frost and silence, through dusk and memory, not seeking peace, not fleeing war, only continuing, as he always had, one step, one breath, one silence at a time. Cale was not meant to be known. He was meant to be remembered only in dreams, and in the hush that follows snowfall, when all things seem still and eternal, and that was enough. Echoes beneath stone, Kale and the Forgotten Vaults, Part 1. Kale and the Whispering Doors. A descent into memory. Kale stood beneath the heavy boughs of ancient evergreens, where the air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The snow lay deep and silent beneath the trees' muffling. Every footstep as he moved with deliberate care through the frozen forest, the chill pressing softly against his skin, like a constant companion, his breath rising in gentle clouds, fading into the pale light of a sky veiled with the soft gray mist a world, hushed as if waiting for something long buried to awaken beneath the cold. The path ahead was barely a suggestion, tangled roots and frost glimmering faintly beneath his boots, a fragile lattice of ice sparkling. Like scattered stars on the forest floor, Kale's hands brushed aside slender branches glazed with crystal, his touch gentle, and practiced the cold biting at his cheeks, but never enough to distract from the steady rhythm of his movements. The silence around him stretched vast and deep, a presence that wrapped the forest like a second skin, inviting him into its timeless embrace. As he pressed deeper, the trees grew taller and more tightly woven, their trunks mottled with patches of lichen and moss, as if the very bark carried a memory of centuries long past. The air grew heavier with the scent of decay and ancient wood, a fragrance that seeped into his bones and steadied his breath. The forest was a cathedral of quiet, where even the faintest sound seemed amplified beneath. The frozen canopy, the snow resting softly on every surface, casting a gentle hush across the landscape. At last the outline of broken stone emerged from the undergrowth, a ruin half swallowed by earth, and time its walls bowed and cracked beneath the weight of countless winters. The surfaces darkened with age and coated in velvety moss. Kale's fingers traced the worn carvings etched deep into the fractured stone, the shape of a winged figure clutching a lantern, its flame long extinguished, but still glowing faintly in the depths of memory, a symbol of guardianship, now folded into the silence of the place. He stepped through a low archway into a vast chamber where the cold stone walls seemed to close in around him like the skin of the mountain itself. The floor beneath sloped downward, worn smooth by countless footsteps long vanished from the world. Kale's torch flickered, casting trembling light upon faded murals, whose colors whispered of ancient rites and offerings. To gods now forgotten, his eyes followed the delicate lines of cloaked figures, their faces hidden in shadow, their hands raised in silent benediction. Kale knelt before a basin carved from stone, its surface cracked with age, half filled with frozen water that caught the torchlight. In fractured reflections, he dipped a gloved hand into the ice, breaking the fragile surface with slow reverence, and retrieved a parchment from within his cloak, pressing it gently upon the cold water as the ink glowed faintly beneath. His touch, a whispered prayer, escaped his lips in a language older than kingdoms. The ice fractured further, releasing the secret message into the depths where silence held it safe from careless eyes. The corridor beyond narrowed as he moved deeper into the mountain, the walls closing like the pages of a forgotten tome. Kale's footsteps softened against the stone, his breath slow, and even in time with the soft echo of his passage. Each step a thread, weaving him deeper into the fabric of history. The ancient carvings along the walls pulsed faintly beneath his fingertips, their meaning folded like layers of shadow and light, hidden in the cold heart of the rock. Ahead, a door of darker stone pulsed faintly, with a warmth that was not fire, but the slow stirring of memory. Roused from centuries of sleep, Kale pressed his palm to the spiral carved at its center, and the door moved, silently revealing a staircase winding down into darkness, where light and time faded like distant echoes. He stepped forward, unhesitating, the shadows folding around him like a cloak of night as he descended deeper into the unknown. The chamber that opened before him was vast and vaulted, its ceiling upheld by pillars, veined with crystalline minerals, glowing with an ethereal blue light, their shimmer casting ghostly patterns that danced softly across the stone walls, a cathedral of silence, where every breath was a prayer and every shadow a story. Kale, as torchlight revealed alcoves set between pillars, where urns lay forgotten, thick with dust and cobwebs, resting places of those who had passed beyond mortal memory. He approached the dais at the center, where a sarcophagus lay carved with chains and keys, its bound figure not in torment, but in watchful stillness. Cale's hand brushed the cold stone, and he felt the subtle shift as a section of the lid slid aside, revealing a hidden compartment, inside which lay scroll cases bound in fragile, cracked leather, their presence a whisper from centuries past. Carefully he broke the seals and unwrapped brittle parchments inked in an unfamiliar script, the letters dancing like shadows. Beneath the flickering torchlight, the words folded tightly, like a secret waiting for the patient to unfold. Cale set the scrolls near a glowing crystalline vein, and allowed their presence to settle around him, seeking the quiet rhythm. Beneath the surface where history breathed softly in silence, a sudden scrape echoed faintly, breaking the stillness. The sound of stone shifting slow and deliberate. Cale's hand dropped to the hilt of his blade, his senses sharpening as he pressed back against the cold wall and listened to the slow movement beyond a narrow passage, where doors carved with cryptic symbols lined the corridor, their meaning lost to time. Cale moved silently through the shadows, his torch held low and steady. At the end of the passage, a door bore the mark of the lantern, bearer the same symbol etched on broken pillars outside. Cale's breath slowed as his hand gripped the cold metal handle, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against the silence. His thoughts steady as he prepared to enter the unknown, where memory and shadow entwined in endless dance. The door gave way with a slow sigh, revealing a chamber bathed in a pale light that seemed not of this world. The air here was thick with the scent of ancient dust and something older, a faint trace of resin and burnt wood it spoke of forgotten rituals. Cale stepped inside the room. The floor beneath, scattered with broken pottery shards and faded tapestries that hung limp from decayed. Wooden beams along the walls were shelves carved from stone that held relics sealed beneath thick layers of dust and frost. Cale's fingers brushed over faded talismans carved from bone and stone, small vessels sealed with wax and etched with symbols. He did not understand each object, held a story folded in shadow, waiting for the one who could listen with silent patience. The room seemed alive with echoes of the past, whispers of voices carried faintly on the cold air, a murmur of footsteps and whispered prayers caught between the cracks in stone walls. Cale's eyes closed briefly, letting the silence fold over him like a second skin, the weight of the centuries pressing gently upon his shoulders, a reminder of the long vigil he had been called to keep. He moved to the center, where a shallow pool of water lay still beneath, a stone basin, its surface reflecting the faint glow of the crystalline veins in the ceiling. Cale knelt and dipped his hands into the icy water, feeling the cold seep through his gloves. A shock that brought clarity and focus. The water shimmered with a subtle light, as if holding fragments of memories beneath its surface. From within his cloak, Cale withdrew a small carved box, its surface worn smooth from use, the scent of wood and resin faint upon his fingers. He opened it to reveal delicate instruments, crafted for precision, tools for writing or unlocking secrets. Hidden in the folds of stone and shadow, Cale set them carefully beside the pool, preparing for the work to come. As he began to prepare the tools, a sudden stillness filled the room, the air growing heavy as if the very walls were holding their breath. Cale's senses sharpened. The quiet scrape of stone against stone echoed again, a soft sound from beyond a narrow doorway at the far end of the chamber. He moved silently toward it, cloak drawn tight around his shoulders, the torchlight dimmed low so as not to reveal his presence. The door there bore intricate carvings like the others, but this one pulsed faintly with the same warmth as the earlier door. Cale's hand brushed over the surface, feeling the slow rhythm of something alive beneath, the stone a presence waiting, patient and watchful. He pressed gently, and the door shifted open, revealing a narrow passage spiraling downward deeper into the mountain's heart. Cale stepped through the threshold, the air growing colder and heavier with each step, the darkness thickening around him like a living thing. His torch flickered, but the crystalline veins above gave enough light to guide his path, the walls seeming to close in as the passage narrowed. Winding like a serpent's saw, spined the silence complete, but for the soft echo of his own breath and footsteps, the passage opened suddenly into a vast chamber beneath the mountain. A cathedral, carved from stone where pillars rose like ancient trees. Reaching toward a ceiling lost in shadow, the floor was cracked with age and dust, but held the faintest traces of footsteps recent and old, a tapestry of lives folded into the rock itself. Cale stood still, letting the stillness settle around him, the weight of time pressing gently against his skin. In the center lay a massive stone slab carved with symbols that shimmered faintly in the dim light, each line and curve a language older than speech, a map of memory drawn in stone. Cale knelt and traced the carvings with careful fingers, feeling the slow pulse beneath the surface, a rhythm like a heartbeat folded deep within the mountain's bones. His mind drifted then to the stories he had heard, whispered in the wind and carved into the stones of forgotten places, tales of watchers and seekers of silent knowledge, those who had come before him and those who would follow in shadow and silence. Cale closed his eyes, letting the echoes of the past wash over him like a gentle tide, the memories folded and unfolded like the slow turning of seasons. In that vast chamber beneath the earth, Cale felt the thin veil between past and present grow fragile, as if time itself wavered on the edge of a breath here. Where silence was alive and memory breathed softly beneath the stone, he understood his place not as a conqueror or thief, but as a keeper of secrets, a shadow moving between worlds unseen and unheard. He rose slowly, stepping back toward the spiraling passage, the weight of the mountain behind him, and the long night still ahead, the cold a steady companion, and the quiet a rhythm that matched the beat of his own heart. Cale moved through the darkness like a whisper, a figure folded into the shadow of forgotten things, and waiting patiently for the dawn to break the spell. The silent watcher's burden, Cale's vigil in the depths. Imagine yourself beside Cale as he ascends slowly from the shadowed depths, the cold stone walls behind him, holding their secrets close, and the weight of centuries lingering like a whispered promise upon his shoulders, each step deliberate, measured as if to not disturb the fragile peace that wrapped the forgotten vaults, the air above carrying a chill softened by the gentle breath of the outside world, where snow lay thick and unbroken beneath the ancient trees. In this moment, Cale feels the stillness settle deep within his bones, a quiet companion as familiar as the cloak wrapped around his shoulders. The silence speaks to him not in words, but in feeling a steady pulse, like the distant beat of a heart, hidden beneath layers of earth and memory. It is here, in this hushed place, where time seems to fold, that Cale finds the clarity he seeks, a space to reflect beyond the noise of the living world above. You can imagine his thoughts wandering through the corridors of his past, each memory a flicker of flame against the darkness, the long nights spent in waiting the sharp cold, biting like a constant reminder of the stakes, his breath slow, and even the rhythm of patience. A skill learned in the silence, where a single misstep could mean discovery or worse. Each moment a careful negotiation between shadow and light, a dance practiced in stillness and quiet resolve. Cale's story is not one of glory or loud triumph, but of persistence, the small acts that add up to survival, the slow mastery of breath and movement, the deep listening that allowed him to hear what others missed, the faintest shift in the wind, the softest creak of a floorboard, the hidden signs left by those who walked before him. He was a shadow among shadows, a figure whose presence was known only by the absence of sound and the gentle stir of the night. There were times when the cold seemed to seep into his very soul, the chills settling in like a second skin, reminding him that the world was vast and indifferent, that the nights could be endless and merciless yet within that cold. Cale found a strange comfort, a constant to anchor him, a rhythm to match the beating of his own heart. The frost not a foe, but a mirror reflecting the stillness he had cultivated inside. You might imagine him sitting alone beneath the frozen boughs, watching the slow dance of snowflakes, Drifting like feathers through the gray light, the world reduced to soft edges and muted sounds, the only motion the gentle rise and fall of his own breath mingling with the whisper of the wind, the cold pressing softly against his skin, a silent reminder of the night's embrace and the vigilance it demanded. In those quiet hours, Cale's mind often wandered to the people whose lives intersected with his own path, the villagers whose doors he passed silently in the dead of night, the whispered names carried on the wind, the faces glimpsed in fleeting moments. Behind frosted windows, each life, a thread woven into the tapestry of his world, a constant reminder of the fragility and resilience that defined them all. He remembered the old healer who had once tended his wounds, her hands steady and kind despite the scars etched into her face, the soft murmur of her voice, carrying warmth in a world often harsh and unforgiving, the lessons she imparted, not just of herbs and remedies, but of patience and understanding, of the quiet strength found in care and compassion. A legacy Cale carried with him like a talisman against the cold gale. As thoughts often drifted too to the friends lost along the way, those shadows who had shared his journey, briefly before slipping into the mists of memory, their laughter and whispered plans echoing faintly in the recesses of his mind, the painful absence, balanced by the resolve to honor their stories by continuing the path with steady heart and clear purpose. Their presence folded into the silence that enveloped him. The burden of his role was never light, the constant vigilance, the need to move unseen, to blend into the tapestry of the night, the ever-present danger that lurked like a predator, stalking the edges of his awareness. Yet Cale bore this weight with quiet dignity, understanding that his strength lay not in confrontation, but in patience and discretion, in becoming part of the rhythm of the world, rather than its disruptor. You might picture him navigating the labyrinth of narrow streets beneath the moon, pale light, the chill of frost, crisping the air as he moved like a breath of wind, slipping past guarded doors and watchful eyes. The soft scrape of leather against stone, the faint rustle of cloth, a melody only he could hear, the pulse of the village, alive yet unaware of the silent guardian weaving through its veins. The stories Cale carried were not all spoken. Some lived in the spaces between words, in the glances exchanged in shadows, in the coded gestures shared with trusted few. His world was one of subtlety, the art of reading silence and intention, the careful balance between presence and absence, a delicate dance, choreographed in the quiet spaces where meaning thrived without sound. He often paused beneath the ancient trees where the snow lay untouched for hours, letting the cold seep into his bones, grounding him in the moment. The soft crunch of frost beneath his boots, the whisper of wind through branches, the distant howl of wolves, threading through the stillness each sensation. A note in the endless symphony of the night, a lullaby for those who listened closely. The firelight of distant homes flickered like stars in the deep night. Cale imagined the dreams carried behind closed shutters, the soft sighs of rest, and the slow turning of bodies wrapped in blankets against the cold. His own breath steady as he moved among the silent streets, a solitary figure carved from shadow and resolve, blending into the rhythm of the sleeping world. Sometimes Cale's hands worked quietly, crafting tools and trinkets from found materials, delicate instruments fashioned with care, the subtle art of creating without sound, or fuss his fingers steady as he wove strips of cloth into hidden pockets or sharpened tiny blades, the cool steel catching the faint light, a reminder of the precision and patience his work demanded, each item a piece of the silent puzzle that was his life. In the long stretches of night, Cale listened not only to the sounds of the forest and village, but to the subtle shifts in the air, the soft cadence of breathing, the distant murmur of voices, and the occasional clatter of an animal moving, unseen, all woven into the fabric of his awareness, a tapestry of sound and silence guiding him through the hours when stillness was both shield and weapon. His solitude was not loneliness, but a chosen companion, a space where thought and observation deepened, where the noise of the day faded into a distant murmur, and the mind could wander freely through memories and possibilities. The cold night air, a balm and a challenge, a reminder of the fragile line between survival and discovery. Cale's journey was marked by moments of quiet reflection. Beneath starlit skies were the vastness of the universe, stretched out like an endless sea. Of light, a reminder of his small place in the grand design and the enduring nature of the watch he kept. The cold no longer just a physical presence, but a symbol of endurance and connection to the cycles of life and death that shaped the world around him. As dawn approached, the first pale fingers of light brushing the horizon, Cale retreated to a hidden shelter carved into the hillside. A sanctuary shaped by careful hands and years of use, its walls thick with stone and earth, protecting him from the harsh breath of winter outside here. He could rest for a time wrapped in layers of wool and silence the steady rhythm of his breathing syncing with the slow pulse of the earth beneath. In this quiet refuge, Cale allowed his mind to drift back to the ancient scrolls and carvings he had uncovered beneath the mountain, the whispered stories of watchers and seekers of hidden truths, the legacy of those who had come before him and those who would follow their footsteps, etched in stone and shadow, a chain of memory stretching across the ages, a weight and a gift carried forward in the stillness. He thought of the lessons learned in the cold woods of his youth, the patient observation, a mastery of breath and movement, the delicate art of becoming invisible, yet ever present the understanding that true power lay not in force, but in knowledge and restraint in the ability to listen and wait, the silent strength that defined his path. Cale's thoughts turned to the future, the uncertain road ahead, the challenges yet unseen, and the quiet hope that his vigilance might one day be unnecessary, that the shadows he moved within might give way to light yet. He knew that until that day came, he would remain a watcher, a guardian, a shadow among shadows, moving silently through the coldest nights and the forgotten places where memory lingered like a breath held in the dark. And so, as the light grew stronger and the world slowly stirred, Cale prepared to step once more into the rhythm of the living world. The cold fading for now, but never far from his thoughts, a constant presence and a reminder of the path. He had chosen the silent dance of survival and memory that defined the assassin beneath the coldest nights. Silent threads in golden halls. Cale and the world of the powerful Cale at the edges of power. Ah, whisper in the court. Imagine yourself walking behind Cale, once more not through the forests, thick with snow, or the narrow alleys of sleeping villages, but through the silent corridors of a noble estate, where light flickers off polished. Stone and servants move like ghosts, tending to the unspoken rhythms of the elite. It is in this place where Cale finds himself now, where the air smells faintly of beeswax and burnt tallow, where voices are rarely raised, but carry meaning in every breath and pause. The night presses gently against the tall stained glass, windows frost creeping up the edges of the panes. Like forgotten fingers reaching in the cold, is thinner here, more distant, yet Cale feels it all the same, wrapped not just in layers of wool and linen, but in the awareness that he does not belong, that every step he takes among marble columns and velvet-lined halls is borrowed space tread with care. He watches from the shadows near a servant's entrance, eyes trained on the shift of candlelight down the hall. He has studied the movements of the guards, the timing of the patrols, the subtle patterns of routine that powerful men rarely notice, but that those like Cale rely on to survive. The door opens with a soft push, and he slips in not with speed, but with silence, the kind that feels more like the absence of presence than the avoidance of sound. His breath is steady, his footsteps calculated, his awareness stretched out like a net, catching the hum of conversation, the rustle of gowns, the creak of old wood beneath slippered feet. The world here is layered, every surface polished, every word considered, every smile rehearsed, yet beneath the gold and glitter there is tension, a current of quiet plotting that never ceases, a theater of control dressed in silk and candlelight. Cale moves past a hallway where portraits of the estate's ancestors hang solemn and large, their painted eyes seeming to follow him as he slips by unseen. These walls have witnessed centuries of whispers, conspiracies, arranged in parlors, and quiet betrayals, sealed with cups of wine. And still Kale remains a secret within a world of secrets, a whisper inside a lie, inside a silence. He remembers the first time he stood beneath a chandelier heavy with wax and crystal, its glimmer, casting broken light upon the stone floors, the awe he felt that has long faded, replaced by understanding not of the nobility's wealth, but of their fears, their paranoia, their fragile confidence in locks and oaths and gold, when it is silence and observation that truly protect or destroy in the great hall. A fire crackles and laughter bubbles like wine. Kale crouches behind a decorative screen, close enough to hear the details of a deal being shaped between bites of roasted quail and sips of honeyed wine. The men here wear velvet and rings, the women glitter with jewels. But Kale knows their power is not in these trappings. It is in what they withhold and what they know, and in who they pretend not to see. The nobleman hosting tonight is known as Lord Ellen, a man with a sharp voice and sharper eyes. His words are layered with suggestion, and his hands never rest, always adjusting his cuff or fingering the edge of his goblet. He has secrets, Kale knows, and tonight the assassin must gather one more thread for the web he's been weaving since the snows began to fall weeks ago. He waits, listens, watches, and moves only when the space between heartbeats opens wide enough to carry him forward. Unnoticed, he has trained for this, for the slowness, the stillness, the long game of observation, where every breath matters and every blink could cost. Everything. Kale does not flinch when the footsteps pass close, when the dogs bark distantly, when a servant brushes the curtain just inches from his cloak. His stillness is part of him, now not an act, but a state of being honed over years in the woods, in the streets, in the hidden rooms of forgotten places. He carries silence like a second skin and wears the cold like a prayer it sharpens. His senses makes him real in a world where most drift through illusions and comforts. He moves again this time up a narrow stair, his fingers brushing the rail just enough to feel the dust collected in the grooves, a place unused, unloved, but still part of the mansion. Spoons he counts, steps, measures, angles, memorizes the turn of each hall, each door, the creak of each board, so that if he must come again, he will already be part of the place. Like the wind that slips through the cracks, or the shadow that settles in corners in a guest chamber upstairs. He finds what he seeks, a satchel carelessly left unlocked, its contents simple, but telling notes, maps, names, places, each word etched in a fine script that reeks of calculation. Kale copies none of it, but commits all of it to memory and practice. He has perfected over long winters, when writing was a danger and remembering was survival. He hears voices, then steps louder than before, not guards, but guests perhaps, stealing moments for a tryst or a rumor, or merely to escape the press of the hall below. Kale slides behind a heavy curtain, still as stone, breath shallow. He listens to them speak of taxes, of war, of a cousin's indiscretion, and a friend's alliance with men who should not be trusted, all valuable, all filed away within the folds of his quiet mind. When the voices fade, Kale waits longer than necessary, letting the silence settle once more before moving. He retraces his steps, but not entirely. The exit must not mirror the entrance. He knows this well. Too many have been caught not for coming in, but for leaving without imagination. And so he takes a path through the kitchens, where the fires are dying and the coals glow low, red, and tired. A cook stirs a pot with one hand and rubs her eyes with the other. She does not see him, nor would she think much of a shadow that passed in the edge of her vision. For Kale moves not like a thief or a ghost, but like something the house itself has always known, a part of its breath, a part of its stillness outside again. The wind greets him with the soft slap of cold against his cheeks. The sky is still dark, the stars blunted by cloud, but the snow gleams in that strange way it does when night is full of hidden light. Kale does not look back. His mission complete, not in action, but in understanding. He carries no stolen goods, only the weight of truths overheard and intentions uncovered. He returns to his shelter, this time an abandoned watchtower. 2 miles beyond the noble quarter, a ruin with cracked walls, and no roof, but enough stone to hold back the wind he lights. No fire, needs no warmth, just silence. And the familiar press of cold against his ribs, he wraps himself tight and begins to write not with ink, but within his own memory, repeating the details again and again until they are etched in the same place where he keeps the sounds of footsteps, the smell of noble perfume, the names whispered when they think they are alone. His world is wider now than it was before, layered, not just in snow and wood, but in velvet and pride and the brittle glitter of power. And in this world, Kale finds a new rhythm, a deeper silence one that pulses through gold-trimmed halls and rests beneath silken sheets. One that speaks not of poverty, but of pretense, and its cracks of fear polished beneath layers of charm. He knows he will return again to these places, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps in a week, but always as the same presence, never seen, never known. Just Kale the watcher, the listener, the bearer of silence, threading his way through the stories. The powerful tell themselves about control and safety and truth. And somewhere within those halls, perhaps even now, someone shifts in bed, feeling a draft where there should be none. A whisper where no voice speaks, and wonders just for a moment if they are truly alone. They are not. Kale is there, and he has always been there where power sleeps, Kale beneath the floors of kings. Imagine now the days have grown colder still. The snow no longer drifts in delicate flurries, but falls thick and constant, blanketing rooftops and silencing entire villages. Beneath its endless hush, and within this deepening winter, the noble manors glow brighter, not from warmth, but from necessity. Fires burn hotter, tapestries hang thicker, guards wear extra layers, and behind every curtain lies a growing fear that the cold might find a way in. But Kale has already found a way in. He walks tonight not along forest trails, but beneath the great house of Lord Dorhan, a baron whose wealth comes not from land or trade, but from silence. Purchased in coin and secrets, his estate rises like a crown at the edge of the noble quarter, framed in black iron and gray stone. Windows like dark eyes and banners, stiff with frost. His halls are long and lined with velvet, the scent of myrrh and cedarwood. Heavy in the air, a place where the rugs are thick and the doors rarely creak, where discomfort is a stranger. But Kale is not. He has passed through this place before not. Seen, not spoken of, not invited, yet always present like a whisper in a still room tonight. He moves beneath it all, beneath the floors where nobles tread without thought. In the crawl spaces once used by masons and servants and now abandoned to dust and cobwebs, it is there Kale listens, one ear pressed to the chilled wood above him, hearing the cadence of voices, the familiar rhythm of deception disguised as diplomacy above him. The noble guests dine and drink and debate the affairs of kingdoms. They speak of land disputes, of arranged betrothals, of taxes. Raised quietly to fund walls that do not yet exist, Kale traces the movement of boots across the floorboards above and matches the sounds to names and titles. He knows this game now, knows how every word said aloud has another hidden underneath every toast, another meaning, every silence, another strategy. He moves on, crawling through the narrow, dark tunnels, his hands cold and raw against stone, his breath slow and controlled. The air here is thick with dust, but Kale has learned how to breathe where others might choke his body. Pressed flat, his mind focused entirely on the vibrations of the house, the language of its structure, and the story it tells in every creak and thrum. He stops beneath a guest chamber and listens closely. The voice above is familiar, belonging to a duke who smiles broadly in public, but speaks here in clipped, angry tones. Kale hears the name of a city 2 weeks. Ride to the south mentioned in a whisper, along with plans for its gates and the men stationed there. He does not need more. He files it away, not on paper, but in memory, etched deeply alongside all the others. This is Kale's strength, the ability to know without needing to touch to carry. Knowledge like a cloak, invisible, but heavy, always present, always weighing him down in exchange for the safety of others, in exchange for the balance between the nobles who rule and the many who never see their faces later As midnight settles, Kale emerges from beneath the manor into the cold courtyard. Slipping out through a coal chute near the kitchens, his body aches from the crawl. His limbs stiff, but he does not rest. Instead, he climbs quietly to the manor's roof, using a forgotten drainpipe and warm footholds in the stone wall, his movements practiced and slow, each motion deliberate, each breath controlled. He reaches the upper level, where he crouches beside a tower window peering inside, where the master of the estate sleeps alone on a bed, so large it could fit a family. The man's dreams are troubled, his brow furrowed, his hands twitching even in rest. Kale studies him not with malice, but with that same stillness he gives to all things he watches, how power rests when it thinks itself unobserved, how even those who command legions sleep like anyone else, vulnerable, soft dreaming of control, but held only by threadbare peace. He lingers there, while his fingers pressed to the frost-lined window, as if he might reach through not to harm, but to understand, to see the shape of power, unguarded and small. Kale thinks of no revenge. He carries no names in his heart, only patterns, only the rhythm of fear and favor, the way it winds through these noble halls, like the draft between floorboards, silent but present. The roof creaks and a crow stirs nearby, but Kale does not startle. He remains still until the candle within burns out, until the dreams of the Baron grow deeper, until he has seen enough. Then he leaves, as he always does, not through the door, not by stair or hall, but back along the roofline, sliding between snow and shadow until he drops once more into the forgotten spaces of the world. In the following days, Kale remains near the estate, sheltering in the abandoned crypt of a church half buried by snow. He eats little, moves less, listening instead to the wind, to the chatter of servants at the edge of town, to the way the world shifts when rumors begin to stir. For Kale is more than a listener. He is a barometer of unrest, and when the nobles begin to mention the same city in passing, when the guards at the edge of the estate double their watch, when riders leave in the night with no banners, it confirms what Kale already knew. The Duke, as whisper, was no idle complaint. It was the early edge of something sharper, something coming. He prepares a message written in code, not letters, but lines carved in wood, a pattern understood by only a few. He buries it beneath a rock near a frozen stream, knowing it will be found and passed and acted upon, not with armies, but with small adjustments, with food, moved to safer villages with families, urged to take longer routes, with merchants told to wait a week more. This is how Kale moves, not with weapons, but with nudges, with ripples, small enough to go unnoticed, until the storm they soften never fully arrives. A week later, Kale returns to the estate, this time not to listen, but to observe from afar. He watches as the nobles gather again, some more somber than before, some leaving early, their carriages rolling heavy through snow as if burdened, not just with passengers, but with guilt. And Kale sees it again, the delicate thread that holds their world together, fraying slowly from the inside, and he wonders how long until it unravels. He does not stay to find out. Instead, he moves on to the next place, the next hall, the next gathering of power, where secrets sit behind wine-soaked smiles and plans are whispered. Through closed doors he follows, no map he carries, no orders, only instinct and silence, and the quiet knowledge that those who claim control most loudly are often those who see the least. In a small manor days later, he finds a hallway lined with mirrors and stops to see himself, not in the reflection, but in the space between, where the man he was is nearly gone, replaced by this quiet presence that exists only between moments, never arriving, never remaining, just watching, just learning. And in this stillness, he breathes once more, not deeply, not freely, but enough, just enough to continue. Kale and the silence beneath power's mask. Imagine now the season has deepened. The snow outside lies heavy and undisturbed, its thick layers blanketing the forest, the villages, and the rooftops of stone manors with equal quiet. And beneath this calm white weight, the rhythm of the world slows. Nobles retreat further into their chambers. Guards double their layers, and fires burn day and night as if flame alone could hold the cold at bay. But Kale does not seek the warmth. He does not gather near hearths or drink from silver goblets. His presence remains far from the center of the rooms, far from the feasts and music and clinking cups he stays. Instead, in the hollow corners and the gaps between the hours in the forgotten attics and passageways, where power does not think to look. And it is here, in these unseen places, that Kale begins to understand something deeper about the world he walks through. The estates grow grander, now the names of the noblemen. More important, their decisions touching borders and armies, and coins with faces carved in them. Their voices echo through marble halls, as they speak of treaties and bloodlines of debts that stretch across generations of alliances so old they have become myth, and yet Kale watches the same patterns in each house, no matter how large or gilded, the same fears, the same betrayals, the same shifting glances over wine cups and silent dinners. In the manor of Lord Askelair, Kale spends 6 nights without being seen. He memorizes the guard rotations. The servant roots the way the floorboards groan near the dining hall and the places where the wind sneaks through the cracks in the high tower stones. He learns when the mistress of the house walks alone with her thoughts, and when the steward leaves letters unattended near the window, where candlelight might reveal what no one is meant to see. He does not take, he does not interfere, he simply observes the delicate play unfolding across the evenings, watching how people maneuver around each other as if playing a slow and silent game, and in time, he notices what they fear most is not rebellion or blade. It is embarrassment, it is shame, it is the risk that someone somewhere has heard the truth behind their smiles. And Kale becomes the embodiment of that risk, the invisible ear, the unseen eye. He rests during daylight beneath the servants' quarters, where warmth from the kitchens drifts through the stone and muffled. Footsteps pass above. He keeps to stillness, his breath shallow, his thoughts unfolding quietly. As he runs through every conversation, he has overheard every whispered threat, every careless admission, every plan made behind closed doors. And in this repetition, he stores what matters and lets the rest slip into silence. At dusk, he emerges only for what is needed: water drawn from a frozen barrel, a crust of bread left behind, or a tool buried in snow. His cloak, now worn and lined with fur gathered from his earliest hunts, keeps him warm. His boots are patched from scraps. Stitched tightly with sinew, his belt holds small tools. Nothing that gleams, nothing that clinks, every piece of him designed to pass unnoticed, even under moonlight. He returns to the manor's shadow, walking along the outer walls where the ivy is brittle and dark beneath the frost. He climbs to the upper galleries, using an arch, forgotten by the masons, a curve of stone that once held banners now sagging with age from the gallery windows. He watches the ballrooms fill with music. He watches the daughters of dukes laugh beneath glass chandeliers. He listens to the men talk of land and soldiers and pride, and he remains the ghost behind the glass, the one not written about, the one not named in stories. And yet his presence shapes these stories without the nobleman ever knowing the message he placed in his seamstress's satchel. 2 nights before changed the route of a merchant caravan. The whispers he passed along through an old monk shifted the tone of an entire negotiation between distant families. The noblemen never see him, never thank him, never know his name, but their lives bend slightly with his touch like grass under snowfall, returning slowly to their upright stance once the moment has passed. In one estate, he watches a child of wealth wander the halls alone, the boy barely more than 10, carrying a wooden sword and a crown of branches. Kale watches from above a quiet figure crouched in the beams. As the child plays without fear, he wonders if this boy too will grow to wear velvet and speak in threats, hidden in courtesy, or if some other path waits for him, one untouched by this strange theater of power and survival. But he does not linger. He never lingers too long in any one place. The cold may shape the land, and the snow may hide many things, but Kale knows that silence is not always safety. It must be chosen again, and again maintained with care. When he finally leaves Lord Askelair's estate, It is not in haste nor in fear. It is simply time. He has gathered what he needed, a dozen truths wrapped in harmless phrases, a pattern of alliances, a schedule of movements, and a single look between two nobles that will change a year's worth of plans. He walks from the estate beneath falling snow, his footprints the only ones along the path for hours. His journey takes him next to a border village, surrounded by stone and rumor. The people there speak often of nobles, but see them only in taxes and soldiers. They know nothing of the games played in candlelit halls, and Cale listens to them with a kind of reverence he finds rare. He sits at the edge of the firelight in their taverns, unseen among them, and hears of harvests and storms and deaths and names, of local men whose fates are tied to winds and wheat, not to titles or courts. He realizes then how distant the noble world truly is, how high its towers must rise to forget the sounds of hunger and the weight of wood gathered in snow. And it is in this contrast that Cale feels the burden of what he knows, for his silence is no longer just survival. It has become a responsibility, a quiet force that threads through villages and cities, without praise, without reward, but not without meaning. He sleeps in barns and cellars, and beneath open skies again, he walks between wagons and watches the children play, and the old men mend tools, and he stores their stories too, not for leverage, but for balance, for memory, for truth. In time he reaches another estate, one he has not yet studied. It rises on a cliff near the sea, its windows tall and narrow, its walls worn smooth by decades of wind and salt. And here, Cale begins again from the edges, from the cold, from the quiet. He moves through its bones, unnoticed, listening, watching, and waiting. And with each step he weaves himself more deeply into the pattern of the world he will never rule, but that he understands far better than those who claim it as theirs. And so his days pass in silence, beneath the frost, between the candles and the cracks, always moving, always watching. Cale, the boy from the forests, now the whisper in the halls of power, the one they will never name, but always feel like a draft in a locked room, like the hush before a secret is spoken, like the cold settling in, winds beneath the city. Cale in the forgotten underground stone shadows and hidden steps. Cale beneath the world. Imagine yourself descending into the cool darkness beneath the bustling medieval town, where the chill of the night air is softened by stone walls carved, long ago carved beneath cobbled streets and shuttered windows. Here lies a labyrinth of forgotten tunnels, ancient aqueducts, and winding passageways, where water once whispered secrets and shadowed footsteps now echo faintly in the damp silence beneath. The city Cale moves like a ghost, a shadow among shadows, blending with the cold stone and the trickling sound of distant streams, his breath steady, his senses sharp as he navigates this hidden world. The air is thick with the scent of earth and moss, mingled with the faint odor of stale water and worn wood. The stones beneath his fingers are cold smooth, yet uneven, worn by centuries of flow and footfall. Cale's boots make no sound on the damp floors. His cloak rustles softly, but is swallowed by the deep stillness of the tunnels here. The world above seems distant and unreal, the noise of merchants, the clatter of hooves, and the murmur of voices all fade into a memory, replaced by the constant drip of water, the faint flutter of bats, and the whisper of his own careful movements. Cale knows every turn, every hidden door, every fragile passage, because he has walked them again and again. When the town sleeps, he slips beneath its feet, exploring the forgotten veins that pulse beneath stone and mortar places, where few dare to go, where secrets lie buried not in books or chests, but in the very bones of the city itself. As he moves deeper, the darkness thickens. The faint glow of moss-covered crystals cast a dim light on the walls, revealing ancient carvings and faded symbols, some worn smooth by time, others sharp and strange. Cale pauses, tracing the lines with his gloved fingers, feeling the history pressed into the stone, the silent language of those who built this underworld long before nobles or merchants claimed the surface. Here the cold is a living thing, wrapping around him like a second skin, reminding him that in these depths warmth is a fleeting dream, a luxury for those above ground, who close their doors and light their fires. The chill seeps into his bones, but Cale welcomes it, a reminder of the discipline that keeps him alive, the endurance that separates him from those who would falter and fall prey to the dark. His path winds past tunnels flooded with shallow pools, reflecting the faint light like broken mirrors here. He sees the shapes of discarded tools, rusted iron scraps, worn leather, and fragments of pottery, each telling a story of lives long, past of labor and survival, of desperation and hope. Cale collects some of these small tokens, not to keep, but to understand, to hold a piece of the past close as he moves through the present. Sometimes the tunnels open into vast chambers where water gathers in quiet pools, the surface smooth and still, reflecting the world above like a ghostly mirror. Cale studies these spaces, knowing they were once vital sources of life for the city above, places where water was collected, stored, and carried to the homes of the rich and poor alike. He imagines the hands that carved these stones, the laborers who toiled in silence beneath the light of flickering torches, unaware of the future shadows that would move silently here. But the underworld is not only history, it is also a stage for the present and Cale's current purpose. As he listens carefully, he picks up faint sounds carried through the stone, the whispered voices of those who move above, unaware of the observer beneath their feet, the creak of a locked door, the muffled footsteps of a guard patrolling the perimeter, the soft sigh of wind passing through broken vents. He uses this knowledge to avoid danger, to plan his movements, to stay unseen in a world where being noticed could mean capture. Or worse, the tunnels offer him protection, not just from the cold, but from the watchful eyes of those who would hunt him, from the nobles who command from their lofty seats, and the soldiers who carry out their will on the ground. Cale's journey through these stone veins is not only physical, but also a passage through time, a connection to the countless souls who have passed this way before him, those who built the city, its foundations, and those who sought refuge in its shadows in times of war, famine, and fear. He feels their presence in the silence, the weight of their stories pressing softly against his mind, urging him onward, reminding him of the constant struggle to survive beneath the cold and different stars. As he moves deeper still, he comes to a narrow shaft, a forgotten well that once brought fresh water from the hills. Now clogged with rubble and ice, Cale carefully clears enough debris to peer into its depths. The blackness below seems endless, a void filled with echoes. He imagines the water once flowing here, clean and cold, a source of life and hope, now silent like so many things in this buried world. This well becomes a symbol for Cale, a reminder that even in darkness life flows hidden beneath surfaces unseen, that survival often depends on finding what is lost or forgotten, and that the coldest nights can be endured if one remembers how to listen to the whisper of water and stone and shadow. He pauses to rest in a small alcove carved into the rock, a place sheltered from the chill and damp. His hands cradle a cup of cold water drawn from a nearby spring. He drinks slowly, savoring the taste, the clarity, the moment of quiet in a world otherwise full of tension and movement. Here he allows himself a breath, a moment to feel the pulse of the city beneath him, the slow heartbeat of stone and water and memory. Cale's mind drifts to the people above the city, the lives that weave through the streets in patterns he can almost trace from this hidden vantage point. The merchants haggling over wares, the children running with laughter their breath like smoke in the cold air, the women drawing water from wells, unaware of the silent figure who moves beneath their feet, tracking their steps, memorizing their routines, their fears and hopes. He thinks too of those who dwell in shadow, those whose names are whispered only in darkness, the spies and thieves, the forgotten and the hunted, who find in these tunnels a fragile sanctuary, a place to disappear from the eyes of a world that forgets them. And yet Cale knows his own exile is different, his solitude chosen, not imposed, a discipline born from necessity and honed by years of cold nights and silent steps. With each passing hour, Cale moves farther along the labyrinthine passages, tracing routes that connect one part of the city to another, places where messages can be slipped unseen, where supplies can be moved hidden from tax collectors and soldiers, where escape is possible in the streets above, become too dangerous and the cold too sharp to bear. He carries no sword tonight, only a small knife tucked into his belt, a tool for survival, not violence, a reminder that sometimes the sharpest edge is not one that cuts, but one that remains hidden, that the power of silence is more formidable than any blade when wielded with patience and precision. The deeper Cale moves, the more he senses the city's breath, the rhythm of lives moving above and below the surface, the interplay of light and shadow, the dance of power and secrecy, played out not only in gilded halls, but here in these stone arteries, the quiet places that hold the city's secrets and its soul. And as the first pale light of dawn begins to touch the edges of the sky, Cale finds a small opening leading out onto a hillside. Overlooking the town, the snow crunches softly beneath his boots, the cold, biting but familiar. A friend rather than a foe, he pauses to look back at the city one last time, before slipping away into the woods where the trees stand, silent sentinel against the coming day. In this hidden world beneath the surface, Cale has found a refuge, a place where the cold is constant but known, where the darkness is deep but not suffocating, where silence is a language spoken fluently and survival a dance, learned step by careful step. And as he disappears into the snow-covered forest, the tunnels remain alive beneath the earth, their secrets waiting for the next shadow to pass through their stone halls. And so the story continues in whispers, in footprints in the quiet spaces where light and dark meet, where the coldest nights are survived not by force, but by the steady rhythm of breath, the careful placing of one foot before the other, and the endless patience of those who choose to walk unseen. Echoes of silence, the hidden stories beneath stone. Imagine the night deepens and Cale once again slips beneath the city as surface his cloak, drawn tight against the damp chill that seeps from the stone walls and into his bones here, in the hidden passages where silence reigns and darkness is a constant. Companion Cale moves with deliberate grace, a figure woven from shadow and breath, tracing paths that few even know exist. His steps soundless on the cold floor, as he becomes one with the labyrinth beneath the sleeping town. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth and ancient stone mingled faintly with the remnants of fires long extinguished and the distant echo of dripping water. Cale senses are tuned finely to every sound, every shift of air, every faint vibration beneath his feet. He listens not only with his ears, but with a quiet alertness that comes from years of practice, a vigilance born from the knowledge that danger here is not always visible, but often waits patiently in the stillness. As he navigates the winding corridors, Cale recalls the countless stories hidden in these walls, stories of those who sought refuge here in times of war or plague, the desperate who fled the streets, the whispered conversations exchanged in darkness, the secret meetings that shaped the fate of many lives long forgotten. Above ground, Cale thinks of the city as a living thing, breathing through these veins its heart, pulsing with a rhythm both ancient and fragile. He passes beneath cellars where barrels of wine once rested and storage rooms where food was kept safe from raids. The remnants of wooden beams and rusted chains tell tales of toil and survival of hands that labored unseen and unremembered, and Cale honors their ghosts in the careful way. He moves in the reverence he carries for the silent history. Beneath his feet sometimes he stops at small alcoves, carved into the rock where messages are left hidden. Carved symbols and marks, known only to those who walk these paths, a secret language that whispers warnings or safe routes, or the presence of watchers. Cale adds his own mark to one such stone, a small rune etched softly with a dagger's tip, a sign for others who live and move in the shadows. A connection across time and space. The deeper into the labyrinth Cale ventures, the colder and more silent it becomes, the air thinner and the darkness thicker, but Cale carries his own light. Within, a quiet strength honed by years of patience and endurance, a steady calm that allows him to move without fear even when the walls seem to close around him, and the cold bites deep into his flesh. He knows these tunnels are more than just stone and earth. They are the veins of the city, its hidden pulse, and the stories they hold are not just carved in walls or whispered in shadows, but lived in every breath, every heartbeat that has passed through them. Cale feels connected to this ancient flow, a thread in a tapestry woven from countless unseen lives. He pauses in a wide chamber where water gathers in a still pool, its surface smooth like glass, reflecting the faint glimmer of crystals embedded in the rock here. Cale kneels and touches the cold water, feeling its clarity and the weight of silence that hangs heavy in the air. He remembers the faces of those who came here seeking refuge and renewal, those who found strength in the darkness, and those who were swallowed by it from this place. Cale traces his path toward the surface, a journey that leads him beneath a marketplace long abandoned, now overgrown with vines and roots. Breaking through cracked stone, the ghosts of commerce linger faintly in. The scent of old leather and dried herbs, the faded footprints of carts and footsteps pressed into worn stones, speak of a life that once thrived here, now quiet, except for the rhythm of Cale's breath and the soft echo of his steps. He emerges briefly into a forgotten courtyard where snow falls lightly, dusting the broken statues and shattered fountains here. Cale pauses to watch the sky pale and gray with dawn, the cold wind brushing against his face, a reminder that above the hidden world the day awakens with its own struggles and hopes. But the underground calls him back, and Cale descends once more into the silent corridors, weaving his way past traps set long ago to catch intruders, and through narrow tunnels that test his patience and resolve, each step a testament to his endurance, his careful study of this hidden world, his will to survive in places where light does not reach. In one narrow passage he finds remnants of a hidden refuge, a small hearth now cold, surrounded by scattered bones and tattered cloth. Cale kneels and studies the scene, imagining the people who once took shelter here, their fears, their hopes, their final moments, a silent story etched in dust and shadow that he alone carries forward. His thoughts turn to the future, to the lives that will cross these paths long after he is gone, and he wonders what stories they will write in the dark, what whispers they will leave for those who come searching for answers, or escape, or survival. Cale moves on, guided by memory and instinct, by the rhythm of the city above and the pulse of the stones beneath his feet. In this hidden world, the cold is a constant companion, a reminder of the fragility of life and the strength required to endure it, and Cale embodies that strength. His breath steady, his footsteps light, his presence a quiet force weaving through the forgotten veins of the city. And as the night stretches on, Cale knows that his journey beneath the city is far from over, that every shadow holds a secret, every corner a story, and that survival is a dance performed in silence, patience and endless watchfulness beneath the cold and different stars, the quiet power of shadows. Cale's last steps below. Imagine the cold night wrapping itself tighter around Cale as he delves even deeper beneath the city, where the ancient stone grows heavier and the air colder still. The tunnels narrow and twist in ways that test even his practiced patience, and the silence becomes absolute, as if the world above has fallen away, leaving only the heartbeat of the earth itself. Beneath his feet, Cale moves with a steady calm or rhythm, perfected by years of walking unseen through dark corridors where every sound is measured, every breath controlled, every step deliberate and light. His cloak blends seamlessly with the shadows, the faint rustle of fabric lost in the thick hush that surrounds him here in these depths. The cold is a living companion, biting at exposed skin and whispering reminders of the fragile balance between life and the dark. The walls around him are rough to the touch, cold, damp stone etched with the faint marks of centuries of hands that carved this underground labyrinth by candlelight and sweat their labor, a silent testament to a forgotten past. Cale traces a finger over an ancient symbol carved deep into the rock, a sigil of protection or warning left behind by those who walked before him and felt the weight of this hidden World pressing down, he stops in a cavernous chamber where water pools quietly the surface so still it mirrors the faint glow of phosphorescent minerals embedded in the rock. The light dances softly, casting ghostly patterns on the walls. Cale kneels beside the pool and cups the icy water in his hands, savoring the cold, the clarity, the fleeting connection to life above that flows through these veins of stone. The silence here is profound, deeper than any forest night, deeper than the stillness of frozen fields. It wraps around Cale like a shroud, but he does not flinch. He welcomes it, a friend and teacher that has shaped him, taught him the meaning of patience, endurance, and the subtle power found in waiting and watching his thoughts drift to the surface, the world of firelit halls and whispered politics of noble houses, the clash of ambition and fear that plays out far from these. Quiet halls of stone and water. Cale knows that here beneath it all the true power flows, unseen, a current that shapes the fates of many without their knowledge, a power born not of swords or crowns, but of silence and secrets. He rises and continues, his path winding through narrow tunnels where the cold grows sharper and the darkness thickens. The walls close in and the air grows thin, but Cale moves with a surety born of countless nights spent in this embrace of stone and shadow, his breath slow, his heartbeat steady, his mind clear as he navigates the maze with practiced ease. Along the way he passes relics of lives long gone, fragments of cloth threadbare, and faded tools, rusted and broken bones, bleached pale by time, each telling a silent story of struggle and survival, a reminder of those who came before, and the fragile thread that links all who walk the line between light and dark. Cale pauses beside a narrow shaft, a forgotten well that once carried fresh water from the hills, now blocked by rubble and ice. He clears some debris enough to peer into the black depths, imagining the flow of water that once sustained a city, now long buried beneath years of snow. And silence, the well, a symbol of life, hidden beneath layers of cold and stone. His journey takes him deeper still, to a chamber lined with ancient inscriptions, faint symbols carved in forgotten tongues, the language of those who built these tunnels long before the city rose above the ground. Cale studies the carvings, tracing their meaning with a mind sharpened by years of learning and listening to the silent stories whispered by stone and shadow. Here he rests briefly in the hollow of the chamber, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath him, the slow, steady beat that has continued through wars, famines, and winter nights, like the rhythm of his own breath, the reminder that life endures even in the coldest, darkest places. When Cale moves on, he finds a narrow passage barely wide enough to squeeze through its walls, rough and jagged, the air colder still as he presses forward, the chill biting deeper into his flesh, but his determination does not waver, his every sense alert to the slightest sound, the faintest movement, the shadow that might hide a threat or a secret. He emerges finally into a vast cavern, a hidden sanctuary beneath the city, its walls dripping with moisture, the air heavy with the scent of earth and water here. The space opens wide, and Cale can feel the presence of something ancient and powerful, the echoes of footsteps. Long past the breath of history wrapped in the damp stone, Cale kneels in the center of this chamber and closes, his eyes allowing the silence to wash over him, the stillness a balm after hours of careful movement, a moment to connect with the world beneath, the world to feel the thread that ties him to the countless unseen lives that have passed through these shadows before him in this place. Cale reflects on the meaning of his journey, the countless nights spent in cold and darkness, the silent steps taken to gather knowledge, to move unseen, to survive the harshest winters, and the most watchful eyes, the quiet mastery that has become his life, the balance of patience and precision that defines him. He thinks of the people he has passed above the city, the nobles and merchants, the forgotten and the lost, the ones who whisper of power and fear and hope, and he knows that his own story is but one thread woven into a larger tapestry, a pattern that shifts and changes with every breath, every choice, every step taken in shadow or light. As the night wanes and the first pale hint of dawn begins to touch the edges of the sky, Kale rises from the cavern, his body aching, but his spirit steady. He begins the slow journey back to the surface, to the world of fire and stone, of voices and faces and secrets carried not just in shadows, but in the quiet strength of those who survive his footsteps echo softly through the tunnels, the cold air biting but familiar the silence. A companion as he moves toward the waking world above, where the struggles of day will begin anew, but where Kale's presence remains unseen, a whisper, a shadow, a reminder that beneath the surface life continues in quiet, strength in endless patience, and in the steady rhythm of breath and step. And so the story of Kale beneath the city comes to a pause, not an end, for the underground holds many secrets, many stories waiting to be told, and many shadows waiting for their time to move unseen beneath the cold, indifferent stars. And as you rest now, let the hush of those stone tunnels settle over your thoughts. Feel the chill of ancient earth against your skin. Hear the soft drip of water and the faint echo of footsteps long past. And imagine Kale there, moving silently in the dark, a figure woven from shadow and breath, a guardian of secrets, a master of survival in the coldest nights and the quietest places. This is the power of silence, the strength of shadows, and the endurance of those who walk unseen. The story of a boy who became the night itself. Frozen paths and fierce resolve. Cal's journey beyond the known, between ice and shadow. The assassin's solitude. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast frozen wilderness, the chill pressing against your skin, so sharp it feels like the world itself has turned to crystal beneath your feet. The sky, a pale wash of gray and white, stretching endlessly beyond the horizon. Here, Kale moves with careful purpose, each step measured, each breath a quiet prayer to the cold wind that cuts like a blade, yet does not break his spirit. The snow crunches softly beneath his boots, a rhythm as steady and slow as the pulse of the earth beneath the ice, a sound that reminds him of every long night spent in waiting, every frozen dawn greeted with patience and quiet strength. The world here is harsh, unforgiving, and beautiful in its icy silence, and Kale has come to understand that survival in this frozen expanse demands more than skill. It requires a deep connection to the land and the courage to face its endless stillness. The wind carries with it the faint scent of pine and frozen earth, mingled with a sharp bite of frost and distant smoke from faraway fires. Kale wraps his cloak tighter around his frame, the wool coarse and thick, but no shield against the relentless cold that seeps through even the heaviest layers. A constant reminder that the night here is long and merciless, and that endurance is the key to living beyond the warmth of firelight and shelter. Each step forward is a small victory, a test of will, as Kale traces paths known only to the most cautious travelers. Routes marked by the subtle shifts in the snow, the faint impressions left by animals. And men long before him, he studies the patterns of wind-blown ice, the way it gathers in hollows and scatters across open fields, learning to read the frozen landscape as if it were a map written in silence and shadow. In the stillness, Kale's thoughts drift to the faces he has known, the fleeting moments of warmth shared in brief encounters, the quiet smiles exchanged in the flicker of candlelight, and the steady hands that have shaped his path, the companions lost to time and circumstance, and the solitude that has become both his shield and his burden. The cold does not only bite at his skin, it settles deep in his bones, a loneliness woven from endless nights and whispered memories. Beneath the pale sky, Kale pauses beside a frozen stream, its surface a glassy mirror cracked by the slow movement of water beneath the ice. He kneels and touches the frozen edge, feeling the cold seep through his fingers. A reminder of the delicate balance between life and stillness, between motion and silence in this world, carved through frost and shadow. The landscape around him is a tapestry of muted colors, shades of white, gray, and blue, blending into one another, the bare branches of trees etched black against the sky, the soft curve of snowdrifts shaped by the whispering wind, the distant outline of hills, blurred by falling snow, all of it creating a silent symphony that plays endlessly For those patient enough to listen, Kale's breath rises in soft clouds that mingle with the mist of his thoughts as he moves forward, guided by instinct and a resolve forged in the darkest hours of winter. His hands steady, his steps light, his eyes sharp for signs of movement, or change the faint rustle of a distant animal, the subtle shift in the air that hints at hidden danger or hidden opportunity. He carries with him only what is necessary, a small knife tucked into his belt, a flint and tinder, wrapped carefully in oilskin scraps of cloth to bind wounds and keep out the chill, and a small vial of bitter herbs known to soothe the aching joints and quiet the restless mind in the long nights, when sleep is a stranger and the cold a relentless companion. The solitude here is profound, a constant presence that presses against Kale's mind as much as the physical cold presses against his body, yet he does not flinch. He welcomes the quiet, the chance to hear the subtle rhythms of the land, the slow dance of snowflakes falling like whispers from the sky, the crunch of ice underfoot, the distant call of a lone bird cutting through the silence, like a note in a forgotten song in the deep cold Kale has learned to find comfort not in warmth, but in stillness, in patience, in the steady rhythm of breath and movement, in the knowledge that survival is a constant negotiation between body and spirit, between the harshness of the world and the fierce will to endure it as he moves deeper into the frozen expanse. Kale recalls the lessons of his youth, the hours spent waiting beneath the boughs of snow-laden trees, the whispered teachings of elders who understood the language of the wild and the cold, the stories told around flickering fires of those who walked unseen and unbroken through the hardest winters, carrying nothing but their courage and their skill. The landscape here is both a challenge and a teacher, a vast canvas that demands respect and understanding from those who wish to traverse it. Kale watches as the light shifts. The long shadows stretch across the snow, painting the world in hues of silver and blue. The wind carries a haunting melody, a song of frost and stone that only those who listen deeply can hear. He thinks, too, of the dangers that lurk beneath the beauty, the hidden ice that gives way without warning, the creaking of frozen trees, ready to fall, the sharp branches that cut through fabric and flesh alike, the silence that can conceal the approach of enemies or the presence of predators, lurking just beyond sight. Yet Kale's resolve is unshaken, for he knows that to survive in this frozen wilderness is to become part of it, to move with its rhythms, to blend with its colors and shadows, to listen with patience and act with precision. The coldest nights may test the body, but they also sharpen the mind and steel the heart. His journey leads him through narrow passes where the wind howls like a restless spirit, and across wide open fields where the snow stretches endlessly to meet the sky. Kale's figure is small against the vastness, yet every movement carries the weight of experience, the quiet power of one who has chosen to walk paths few dare to follow. He recalls moments of hardship, the nights when hunger gnawed at his belly, the frostbite that crept like a silent thief across his fingers, the aching loneliness that threatened to unravel his spirit, but also the moments of unexpected grace, the soft warmth of a fleeting fire, the gentle touch of a kind hand, the brief respite found in a shared glance or a whispered word in this vast frozen world. Kale is both lost and found, a solitary figure shaped by the relentless cold and the endless night, a man who carries his past like a cloak, woven from memories and silence, whose footsteps leave faint marks in the snow, soon to be covered again by the endless drift. A reminder that even in the harshest places life moves forward, unseen and unheralded. And so as you rest now, imagine the stillness of the frozen plains, the sharp air filling your lungs, the quiet that envelops Kale as he moves through the endless white, the strength found not in force, but in endurance in the patient, waiting for dawn, and in the unyielding will to survive the coldest nights and the loneliest paths. This is the story of Kale, not just as an assassin, but as a man shaped by the harshness of the world and the quiet power of the cold, a journey of solitude and resolve, a testament to the strength found in silence and the endless dance between shadow and light. Whispers through the ice, the assassin's endurance and legacy. Imagine the world wrapped in a thick quilt of ice and snow, the horizon stretching endlessly white and cold. Beneath a sky heavy with the promise of more winter storms here, Cale moves with a quiet determination. Each step, a slow beat in the rhythm of survival, a dance, choreographed by the frozen winds and the relentless march of time. The cold seeps into every layer of his clothing, pressing against his skin, as if trying to claim him, yet Cale meets it with a steady calm, a resilience forged from countless nights, spent battling frostbite, hunger, and loneliness in the vast expanse of frozen wilderness. The snow crunches softly beneath. His boots a familiar sound that marks his passage through the stillness, a gentle reminder that he is alive and moving forward around him. The landscape is a muted palette of whites and grays, the skeletal branches of trees reaching upward. Like the fingers of forgotten spirits, the snow drifting in delicate swirls, carried by the capricious wind, the distant mountains standing as silent sentinels, watching over the endless plains below, each feature a note in the quiet symphony of winter that Cale knows so well. He pauses beside a ridge where the wind gusts sharp and biting, pushing against him like a living force testing his resolve. Cale plants his feet firmly and adjusts the heavy cloak wrapped tight around his shoulders, the fabric stiff with frost and the edges worn from long use, but still a barrier against the relentless cold, a shield fashioned not just from wool, but from years of experience and careful preparation. His breath rises in soft clouds, mingling with the mist of early morning as he surveys the frozen land, the faint tracks of animals etched in the snow. A fox's cautious steps, a hare's quick, darting path, a reminder that life continues even in the harshest conditions, that survival is a constant negotiation between predator and prey, between stillness and movement. Cale's mind wanders to the moments of human connection that have shaped his journey, the quiet voices shared in the flickering light of a campfire, the gentle hands that tended wounds, the brief smiles that offered warmth amidst the cold. These memories are treasures carried close like precious stones against the chill, reminders that even in isolation, he is never truly alone. He moves onward, guided by instinct and memory, tracing the subtle signs left by those who came before, a worn cairn marking a safe passage, a scraped branch pointing the way, a faint smoke trail curling from a hidden shelter. These markers form a secret language written across the white canvas, a map of endurance and hope. The night approaches, bringing with it a deeper cold, a silence so complete it wraps around Cale like a thick blanket. The stars pale points of light in the vast sky above. The moon, a cold guardian, casting its silver glow over the frozen world below. Cale prepares to make camp, his movements slow and deliberate, the striking of flint, the careful gathering of dry twigs. Sheltered beneath rocky overhangs, the faint crackle of fire, pushing back the darkness and the cold as the flames flicker. Cale, as thoughts turn inward to the lessons carved into his spirit by the relentless winter, the endless hours of waiting and watching, the necessity of patience, the acceptance of vulnerability, and the quiet strength found in endurance. He thinks of the seasons that have come and gone, the cycles of frost and thaw, the delicate balance that sustains life even here at the edge of the world. He wraps himself in the warmth of the fire, the flickering light casting long shadows across the snow and stone, the comforting scent of burning wood mingling with the crisp air, a brief sanctuary in the unyielding cold, a place where he can rest without fear, where the weight of solitude lifts for a moment, allowing space for reflection and quiet hope. Cale's fingers trace the edges of a worn journal tucked inside his cloak, its pages filled with sketches and notes, maps and memories, a record of his travels, his encounters, and the knowledge he has gathered, a testament to a life lived in quiet observation and careful action, a legacy built not on loud deeds, but on small acts of survival and resilience. The fire's glow softens and the night deepens, the cold pressing in once more. Cale settles into the stillness, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the slow rhythm of breath, the deep calm that comes from accepting the world as it is, with all its beauty and harshness intertwined. He knows that tomorrow will bring new challenges, the shifting snowdrifts, the hidden dangers beneath, the ice, the endless expanse of white that can swallow the unwary. But Cale is ready, his spirit tempered by the cold, his mind clear, his body strong from the countless nights spent mastering the art of endurance in the frozen wilds. And as you listen now, let the silence of the snow-covered plains fill your thoughts, the steady crunch of footsteps on frost, the whisper of wind weaving through bare branches, the warmth of a fire glowing softly against the night, and imagine Cale there, standing firm. In the cold, a solitary figure carved from shadow and ice, a testament to the quiet power of resilience and the enduring strength of the human spirit. This is the story of a man who walks between worlds, the seen and the unseen, the warmth of firelight and the endless cold, who carries the weight of solitude with grace, and whose footsteps leave a path of endurance through the frozen wilderness. A journey not just of survival, but of transformation and quiet triumph beneath the vast, indifferent sky. Echoes in the city of stone. Cale and the web of forgotten power, the invisible ties. How Cale moved among the powerful without being seen. Imagine yourself standing in the shadow of a city carved from stone and time, its towers, reaching skyward not with grandeur, but with quiet permanence, the streets. Below, coiled like veins wrapped in the pulse of daily life, but hidden within those narrow alleys and worn courtyards moved a figure whose presence was known only to silence itself. His name was Cale, and here, in this place of whispers and worn stone, he had found his way not through force or title, but through patience, observation, and the subtle power of knowing when not to be seen. The city was older than memory, perhaps shaped by hands long returned to dust. Its architecture, a patchwork of era's forgotten columns, supported newer balconies, and faded murals clung to walls like memories that refused to be washed away. Its people, too, were shaped by this slow layering of time traders and priests, soldiers, and scholars, beggars, and merchants, all moving in quiet circles around one another, connected by routines, by rumors, by 1,000 invisible threads that bound them tighter than any law. Cale did not belong to any of these groups, but he passed through them all with a familiarity that did not call attention to itself. He knew the hours when the spice merchant unlocked his shutters, and when the baker as apprentice would steal a loaf. He knew the rhythms of the washerwomen as songs, and the slight hesitation in a nobleman's gait as he stepped across a cobbled street. Slick with last night, serene, he was a shadow within the city, breath present but never demanding to be seen. His days began not with fanfare, but with the soft light that filtered through the broken slats of an abandoned storeroom tucked between two crumbling towers. It was here that he kept his few belongings, wrapped in cloth worn, smoothed by use, a small blade, a length of wire-folded notes written in cipher on scraps of parchment, a chipped cup for tea, a piece of charcoal for marking quiet walls and mapping thoughts. Cale moved with the city, not against it, his presence fluid, never interrupting, always folding into the movements of others. He slipped into places where words carried weight and faces told stories, noble gatherings, where wine flowed and flattery danced like candlelight in darkened chambers, where secrets passed from one trembling hand to another. He was not always there to act, sometimes only to witness, to gather, to understand how power moved and where it liked to hide. He learned early that strength in the city was not only measured in gold or soldiers, but in knowing who trusted whom, and who feared what, who whispered in back rooms, and who listened from behind curtains, who owed favors, and who collected them not with threats, but with quiet reminders. And Cale made it his business to know these things, not because he sought to control, but because knowledge was survival and understanding was his shield. There were days when he spent hours sitting in silence among the scribes in the temple's lower chambers, watching their fingers dance across scrolls, noting who lingered at the mention of certain names, whose lips curled slightly at reports of distant battles, whose eyes darted when the high priest as envoy passed through. These small gestures were stones thrown into still water, and Cale watched the ripples with the patience of someone who had learned that nothing was truly small in the world of power. He memorized the schedules of judges, the preferences of guards, the peculiar habits of a foreign diplomat who never drank unless the glass was poured by his own hand. These were not random facts. They were pieces of a puzzle Cale assembled each day. One that had no edge, no final picture, only layers upon layers of stories half told and truths. Half hidden in the evenings, Cale would climb to the rooftops of the inner district, where the domes of old sanctuaries caught the last light and cast long shadows across the wealthiest courtyards from above. He could see how the city breathed, how light flickered behind drapes where deals were struck and alliances made. He could hear the soft murmur of servants sharing the truths they were not meant to know, and smell the trail of incense that marked the path of priests who walked in both faith and fear. He did not steal from these people, though he could have easily. His presence was not one of disruption, but of deep listening. He wanted to know the why behind their choices, the quiet desperation behind their eyes, the hidden wounds behind their boasts. It was in these details that Cale found the true shape of power, not in decrees or coins, but in the fragile balance of fear, desire, guilt, and memory. Sometimes he followed individuals for days, not out of malice, but out of curiosity. He watched a general who never removed his gloves, even in private, and learned of the scar he kept hidden. He followed a widow who fed the poor from behind a veil and discovered the debts she paid with silence, and he sat across from a merchant prince in a crowded inn, listening to the man's boastful lies and seeing in his trembling fingers a truth he could not speak aloud. Cale kept number records on paper. Only in his mind were the stories twisted and wound together, forming a quiet tapestry of understanding. He became something more than a man with a blade. He became a mirror to those around him, reflecting their fears, their choices, their secrets, not to expose them, but to learn from them, to walk among them and see. What others refused to see. His clothing was plain, layered, and worn with care, each piece designed to avoid notice. Neither too fine nor too ragged, he changed his appearance just enough to blend sometimes. A faint scar added with ash, sometimes a limp that disappeared by morning. He became what the city needed him to be: a question without an answer, a presence without a name. He moved among the kitchens and the courtyards, the council halls and the slums, hearing the same stories told in different tongues, the same hopes echoed in different prayers. And he understood that the great machine of power was not some monstrous force, but a collection of human choices, repeated, whispered, passed on. And he chose to know them not with judgment, but with stillness. And as night settled again, and the cold air drifted through the open spaces of the city, Cale returned to his small corner of shadow. He lit no fire, but wrapped himself in silence, drinking water drawn from an old cistern, and nibbling on hard bread, softened by time. He did not dream of conquest or recognition. His dream was the map he carried in his mind, the ever-shifting web of people and paths, each one more delicate and complex than the finest silk in that web. He saw his place not at the center, but in the quiet edges, where threads could be touched without snapping, where stories could be heard without being told. And in that stillness, he found something stronger than allegiance or fame. He found the freedom to understand the city from every angle, from every voice, from every shadow that dared to speak, and those that remained forever silent. And so, as you rest now, imagine the narrow streets lit by lanterns swaying in the breeze, the muffled voices of a city drifting off to sleep, the hush that follows when doors are bolted and secrets are left on the night. Air and see Cale moving among them, not with violence or force, but with gentle steps and listening eyes, an invisible presence shaped not by ambition, but by the need to know and the desire to remain unseen. This was his gift, and his burden: not to rule, not to command, but to witness and to endure, and in the quiet folds of the city, heart to leave behind no mark, except the subtle change that follows being truly understood. Rooms behind rooms. Cale's silent passage through secrets and shadows. Imagine yourself now within the walls of the city, not just among the streets and plazas, But behind the walls, within the walls, in the places where the mortar crumbles and the light does not reach, where the heartbeat of the city grows quiet and slow and secret, here is where Cale walked not on grand thoroughfares or palace steps, but through kitchens, storerooms, maintenance shafts, old forgotten corridors layered in dust and memory. He moved through a city most would never see a city folded, inside the other like a page, tucked quietly into a book. Never read aloud, his feet knew every uneven stone, every floorboard that groaned beneath weight, and every one that did not his hands brushed against the edges of doorways. Barely wide enough for one person, his breath softened in the tunnels, where the air hung damp, and still and faint echoes of distant voices came like ghosts through the stone. This was his passage not just across space, but across time, through old paths, carved by need and forgotten by luxury. Cale did not wear black or dramatic robes. He wore tones of dust and wood and faded linen. He dressed in the memory of color the way the walls did, so he disappeared not by magic, but by logic. No one looked where nothing had changed, and Cale had mastered the art of becoming the nothing people ignored. His presence was the blank space in a ledger, the unused cupboard, the corner that never drew a glance. He passed the kitchens where servants whispered and passed notes. He moved between the narrow beams, above the banquet halls where courtiers lied beautifully to each other. With smiles and subtle glances he sat in the folds of shadow behind judges' benches, watching their fingers tap and their eyes narrow at the weight of testimony. He heard stories unfold, not with grand declarations, but with sighs, unfinished sentences and pauses that carried more meaning than words ever could. He knew where the counselor daughter hid her journals under the fourth tile of her floor. He knew which priest slept lightly and which slept deeply and which spoke secrets aloud. While dreaming, he knew the merchant whose ledgers told one story and whose wine-soaked letters told another. Cale did not use this knowledge to destroy or manipulate. He held it like a sculptor holds clay, gently, patiently shaping his understanding of the world around him without breaking the form. Each day in the city was not a repetition for Cale. It was a study. The same faces walked, the same roads, but their posture shifted, their expressions changed, and Cale cataloged these things the way one might observe the changing patterns of birds before a storm. He knew when a man began to worry by the way he cleaned his hands too often, or how a woman in power would begin to wear darker rings to signal something more serious had taken root beneath the surface. And the city had roots, its buildings layered atop ancient ones, its laws layered atop older customs, and Cale felt them all the way a root system feels the water below, even when it lies beneath. Stone, he had mapped not just the layout of the city, but the movement of its people, their moods, their memories, the way one scandal might be passed like a candle lighting fires in different homes at different times. Each flamed small until one wasn't it. He never rushed. He waited for patterns to form, for stories to finish half unfolding before he made his quiet presence known. Sometimes it was a slip of paper passed under a tavern table. Sometimes it was an object moved slightly to signal an understanding. Sometimes it was only the absence of something, a voice, not repeating a rumor, a meeting not occurring at its usual time. And in these acts of silence, Cale communicated more than 100 declarations ever could. There were places even deeper than these spaces behind rooms. There were the tunnels, the old aqueducts, long dry, the abandoned service ducts, forgotten after renovations, the holes in walls where bricks had crumbled. And no one had noticed these places. Cale explored with quiet reverence, not as a conqueror, but as a witness. He touched the stone worn, smoothed by hundreds of hands from another century, and read their passage as if it were a message meant for him. He kept a journal not of names or acts, but of movements, a ledger of the city's invisible rhythm when the wind shifted, and which bell towers rang out of time, which fountains sputtered in cold, and which lanterns flickered oddly. He kept track of which child no longer sold apples in the square, and which dog barked at nothing. When the moon was full, he read these things not as superstition, but as signals. the language of change written in the quiet at night. He moved differently, slower, not from fatigue, but from intention. Because in the hours when the city slept, it was louder in its secrets. Walls creaked more when people were hiding. Something footsteps meant more when they shouldn't be there. And Cale moved among these signs like a needle through cloth. He threaded his way between truths unspoken and lies wrapped in politeness. And he stitched together the shape of things not by confronting them, but by understanding where they did not quite hold together. He began to be seen only by those who already lived in shadow. The boy who watched horses at dawn and never spoke, the old woman who sold root vegetables, and remembered everything, the teacher who once had a name feared by nobles, but now spoke only to birds in the temple courtyard. They didn't ask Cale questions, they didn't demand his origin. They simply nodded when he passed, because some presences do not announce themselves. They are felt and respected for their stillness. Cale began to receive messages not addressed to him, but left, where they knew he would find them: a fold in a book in the public library, a mark scratched lightly onto the side of a well, a stone stacked slightly off in a fountain's edge. And he replied in kind, by adjusting the angles of prayer mats, by placing a dropped scarf in a window, by being present in a mirror. When a man needed to know he wasn't alone, this was not espionage. It was communion with those who saw the world through the same silent lens. He never claimed to protect anyone, but he had stopped things simply by witnessing them, by being where he shouldn't have been, by letting a powerful man know that someone saw, by removing a ladder that led to a window that would have been reached by placing a candle on, a sill to signal that someone still watched from the dark. This was his power, not in force or in title, but in presence, the quiet kind that disrupted by simply existing in time. Cale understood something even deeper, that the city itself was aware that the stones carried memory, the air remembered breath, the doors long unused still swung in rhythm, with habits forgotten by their makers. And he felt himself becoming part of that rhythm, his steps timed to the movement of clouds, his decisions shaped by the curl of steam from an open vent, the ripple of fabric in a courtyard banner. The city had accepted him not as a visitor, but as a secret it chose to keep. He did not fear death, because he did not fear absence. He had lived so long unseen that the idea of vanishing completely felt more like a return than a departure. He did not crave legacy, because he had left none. He had changed things without leaving fingerprints, helped lives without taking credit, shifted power without claiming the result. He was the space between events, the pause between sentences, the breath before the cry. And as you breathe now and listen, imagine yourself within that space, within the ancient walls of a city asleep in its own. Memory. Feel the stone warm from the sun, now cooled by night. Smell the faint soot of lanterns burning low, and hear the echo of Cale's footsteps, not loud, not hurried, but measured like a heartbeat, barely noticed until it stops. And remember that sometimes the strongest influence is not the loudest command or the sharpest blade, but the silent presence of someone who listens, who waits, who understands. This is where Cale remains, not in statues or songs, but in the turning of locks at night, in the quiet exchanges between those who still believe, in unseen hands, in the weight of a look across a room, and the knowledge that something has changed because of a man who needed nothing except to see the truth and let it shape him. The veil between worlds. Cale's final lessons in the language of power. Imagine a morning where the city is slow to rise. The fog hangs low and reluctant in the narrow alleys. The sun only a pale outline behind thick clouds. The air is cool, but not cold, carrying with it the scent of damp stone and wood smoke. And in that hush between night's end and the clamor of day, there moves a figure whose rhythm matches the silence, whose steps are chosen, not out of caution, but understanding. This is Cale moving once again through the folds of a place he no longer merely observes, but understands as deeply as he knows. The quiet beat of his own heart. By now the city has become less of a place and more of a body to Cale, a breathing, living thing with pulses and aches and forgotten corners that hide both sickness and memory. He does not walk its streets like a visitor. He moves like a healer, seeking not to cut or cure, but to feel where the temperature shifts, where the breath catches, where something has changed without words, and like always, he listens. He listens with every part of himself, with the tilt of his head, with the feel of air along his skin, with the way distant bells echo off wet brick and faded plaster. Kale begins his days earlier, now not out of necessity, but because the stillness of dawn is when the deepest truths come. Softly, when the marketplace is empty and the taverns are hushed, when the birds have not yet declared their songs, and the children at his feet have not yet worn new paths through the mud. He walks slowly through these moments, collecting pieces of a day not yet begun. A shop door, slightly ajar, a note, tucked behind a drain pipe, a pile of stones that has grown by just one from the night before. Each detail a message not always meant for him, but understood by him just the same. He walks now not with urgency, but with presence, and as he does so, those who dwell in the quiet notice. A boy who sweeps the steps of the infirmary, who has never spoken, but always nods in Coldest's direction. The twin bakers who leave one roll on the ledge beside the gate each morning, never asking. Who takes it the woman who sharpens tools near the southern square, who once saw Kale watching from above and chose to say nothing, because some things are understood best in silence in the course of his movement. Kale passes through the quarters of those with power, not their homes, but their shadows, their routines. He stands near a fountain where a noblewoman sends her letters each week and notes when the courier is not the usual one. He watches the lanterns outside the halls of judgment and remembers the night they burned blue instead of gold, and the next day's verdict was quieter than expected. He observes the entrance to a private club where generals meet and sees who knocks with 3 fingers instead of 4. A detail so small, only someone like Kale would understand. His attention is not only on the powerful, though it never has been. His heart still turns to the small patterns, the unspoken codes shared between those with little to lose and less to prove. He walks past a girl who draws chalk lines beside her stoop and notices when she adds a curl to the final one, signaling danger from within. He accepts a folded cloth from an old man polishing his boots, and inside is a name not of an enemy, but of someone who has begun asking too many questions in the wrong way. And Kale stores that name quietly away, not as a threat, but as a signpost, something to watch, something to weave into the larger picture. There is no war to fight, no battle to win, not in the way stories usually unfold, but there are conflicts, subtle and constant, layered, like the bricks of the city itself, whispers that turn into rumors, that turn into movements that shift the balance of entire households, entire districts. Kale does not seek to stop them, nor to guide them. He simply notices. He becomes the pause, the breath, between before and after. And sometimes that pause is enough to change everything. There are nights now when he sits longer in the highest parts of the city, where the wind cuts sharp and the rooftops are lonely and the stars feel just a little closer than usual. And there he reflects, not with longing, but with softness, on how far he has come, not in miles, but in silence. In the way he no longer has to remind himself to move slowly, to breathe calmly, to listen carefully. These things are no longer habits. They are his nature, and he remembers the winters that nearly broke him, and the mentors who spoke more with glances than words, the tools he carved by hand, and the first time he knew he could enter a room and leave without being noticed. He thinks of those nights in frozen forests, the way the trees groaned under the weight of snow, and how the breath of animals curled into the air like threads of memory, and how he had become one of them, unseen, but fully alive now in this city of stone and smoke and layered secrets. Kale carries those memories, not as burdens, but as blessings. His survival was not the end of his journey, but the beginning of understanding how to survive with purpose, with grace, without needing to be the loudest voice or the sharpest blade. He begins to visit places where memory lives in stillness, old libraries, where ink is faded and pages are brittle, where the smell of parchment is thick and comforting, and he runs his fingers across texts, never finished authors never named, and he reads not just for knowledge, but for the shape of forgotten thoughts. He moves through abandoned shrines, where dust lays thick and offerings remain untouched, and he feels the echo of prayer, not in words, but in the quiet surrender that once lived there. Cale understands now that his purpose has never been to alter the course of history, but to witness it, to keep it honest by never forgetting its quiet corners, to remain not above or below the lives of others, but within them a thread, woven through cloth never seen, but necessary to hold the shape. And he walks with that knowledge gently, like a man carrying a secret not of power, but of responsibility when people speak of him. And they do, though never by name. They call him the shadow or the whisper, the step that did not echo, the breath that warned them. Without sound and in this way, Cale lives not in fear, but in legacy, not in memory, but in presence. He becomes part of the rhythm of the place. A reminder that not all guardians wear armor, not all wisdom speaks. Loudly, not all influence comes from the throne, and in the final passage of this sidious, winding tale, Cale stands in a narrow alley, lit by the faint glow of a fading lantern, and watches as two men pass, without seeing him, their conversation laced with decisions that will ripple for weeks. Their path altered not by confrontation, but by the silence behind them. He turns and walks the other way, disappearing not out of avoidance, but because his part has already been played and nothing more needs to be done. So as your eyes begin to grow heavy and your breath slows to match the calm of the night, imagine Cale still out there, moving gently across rooftops, slipping through the narrow spaces between words and glances, resting beneath the eaves where dreams hang like drying cloth. And know that in every city, in every place where people speak and sleep and wonder, there are those like Cale, quiet witnesses to the turning of days, whose names are not remembered, but whose choices shaped everything that came after. He does not ask to be known. He does not need to be seen. He is the quiet footstep behind the loud parade, the pause before the decision, the unseen weight that keeps the world from slipping too far. And when his story ends, it will not end with a cry or a flame, but with the soft closing of a door, the hush of snow against stone, and the fading presence of someone who chose to understand rather than control, to protect without command, and to endure not for glory, but for peace. This is how Cale survives, not by hiding, but by becoming part of the quiet, and in doing so, he reminds us all that there is strength in stillness, and that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones told not with swords or crowns, but with footsteps left behind in dust and dreams. The quiet among the powerful. Cale's path through thrones and echoes, among courts and candles. Cale's eyes behind the veil of nobility. Imagine now a place where the air is always heavy with scent and silence. A palace not filled with song or shouting, but with the measured stillness of power. A place where footsteps do not echo unless they are meant to be heard, and the flicker of a candle means more than a raised voice. Here within these endless halls of polished stone and velvet hangings, Cale walks not as a guest nor as a servant, but as something in between. He is the breath between conversations, the shadow just outside of reach, the presence that leaves no trace, yet sees all this world of marble and whispering nobility is not made for those like Cale, but it is within it that he finds new meaning, not because he belongs, but because he understands what it means to remain unseen in a place where every glance is a transaction, every silence a bargain, every smile a test. Imagine Cale there, not bowing, not retreating, but moving through the invisible corridors, the ones behind the walls and above the ceilings, where dust gathers and secrets settle into stone. He learns first by watching, by standing in the long empty galleries at dawn, when only the housekeepers shuffle past, by crouching above the banquet halls, where laughter flows too easily and masks slip when wine is poured. He listens, not just to what is said, but what is not, the silences that stretch too long, the careful evasion of words that carry weight, the language of glances that dart across, the table-like blades Kale comes to know the court not as a structure, but as a breathing creature with habits and rhythms. He maps its moods. The way a tracker follows weather, he knows which lords pace when nervous, and which fall still when plotting. He observes how a noble woman's fingers curl slightly when she lies, how a young heir sharpens his tone only when his father is absent. He learns who fears not by confession, but by proximity. And where guards are posted not for protection, but to keep things in, he begins to see that behind every show of wealth lies a shadow of fear behind. Every ceremony lies tension so thin it could tear. He sees how easily favor shifts, how quickly a smile can vanish when eyes turn away, and he understands that here more than anywhere, the true movements are hidden behind. The words Kale does not speak, but he hears everything. He does not confront, but he collects, and it is in this patience that his presence becomes power beneath the palace. There are tunnels once used for storage or escape, now forgotten, but not by Kale. He moves through them. As others move through courtyards, walking by touch and memory, he feels the walls where old chalk still lingers. Marks once used for direction or warning, he steps over bricks worn, smooth by hurried boots from another age, and in these corridors he finds echoes of other lives. Other times, other Kells perhaps who watched and waited and passed unseen. He studies the court's routines with the precision of a scholar, not because he desires to disrupt, but because he knows. The smallest shift can signal the largest change. When a steward forgets a step in the ritual, when a curtain is drawn too early, when a door is opened in silence, that is where truth lives in the places no one notices, but where meaning waits. Like breath held too long at night, Kale walks the palace like a ghost, not through open halls, but behind the scenes where servants speak in code, and guards do not look each other in the eye. He hears a lover's argument behind, closed drapes the clink of coins in the wrong pockets, the sharp inhale of someone who has just decided to betray, and he records none of it on paper. His ledger is memory, and his notes are the shifting shapes of human intent. There is a library locked to most where Kale slips in beneath the cracks between hours, where he reads not only books, but what is left between them, marginalia notes. Scratched in haste bindings repaired in secret pages, pressed too tightly, as if to hide meaning within weight. He sees history not as a series of events, but as an unspoken agreement between the powerful and those they hope will forget. He sees how names change, but patterns do not, how each ruler repeats the rhythm of the one before, only with different ornaments. Kale learns also from those who are never seen, the ones who scrub floors and polish silver, the ones who sleep in rooms without windows and eat from chipped bowls. They are the true holders of power, not because they wield it, but because they survive it. They tell him things in glances in the way they fold sheets, in the way they offer bread in silence, and Kale listens. He sees their strength in stillness, their knowledge in restraint, and he learns that in the world of the noble, it is often the unseen who carry the greatest truths. In time, Kale becomes part of this rhythm, not disrupting it but joining it, like a stone dropped gently into a stream. Altering flow without resistance, nobles begin to speak, softer when they feel alone, not knowing. He listens. Stewards walk differently down halls. They suspect might echo too much. He becomes not a threat, but a presence and understanding that the palace has eyes that do not belong to the throne, that justice sometimes wears no crest. There are moments when Kale acts not with violence, but with presence. By standing just outside a doorway, he shifts a decision by leaving a mark where only one person will notice. He changes a plan by being seen once by a man who is about to lie and whose voice catches. Mid-sentence, Kale creates ripples, not by force, but by awareness, and those ripples become waves, not all at once. But inevitably, he understands that the court is not held together by law or loyalty, but by belief that things are as they should be, belief that power protects, belief that the rules cannot be bent. And Kale begins to gently unweave those beliefs, not with proclamations, but with patterns, with quiet proof that secrets are known, that lies are seen, and that someone walks These halls who needs nothing but sees everything. He does not take sides. He does not decide who should rule. He only ensures that truth is not buried too deeply, that those who harm with words or gold or silence feel the presence of something they cannot name. He is not justice. He is not vengeance. He is the quiet weight of consequence. And it is that weight that begins to change the way the palace breathes. In the stillest hour of night, Kale returns to the highest tower where the wind speaks without words, and he watches the city lights flicker beneath him. He thinks not of legacy or legend, but of continuation, of the simple act of watching, listening, learning. He knows that this work is not heroic, that no songs will sing of his patience, that no statues will hold his name. And that is how it must be, because the palace stands, not on stone, but on silence. And silence is what Kale understands best, not as absence, but as presence, as a space, where meaning gathers like dust, and shadows speak their own truths. He is not there to be remembered, he is there, so others may live with eyes slightly more open, with hearts slightly more cautious with choices, slightly more kind. So imagine now the flickering candlelight of that vast hall, the golden glow of chandeliers, reflected in polished floors, the echo of voices discussing law and inheritance. And behind it all, behind the curtains, and within the walls, Kale, listening not to change the world, but to ensure it does not forget itself. And as you rest, let that stillness surround you, the same stillness that allows people like Kale to walk freely among the powerful, not to conquer them, but to keep them honest. And when you dream, dream of the soft footfalls down corridors, no longer mapped of the presence that shifts the course of decisions without ever being mentioned of a man named Kale, who became more than shadow, who became the breath between stories, and who reminded us that sometimes the greatest strength lies in simply never needing to be seen at all. Where the gilded fade, Kale beneath the surface of power, imagine the palace again, not in its golden light and velvet ceremony, but in its quieter moments, beneath the weight of rain, beneath the dull sky of late autumn, where every corridor smells of wet stone, and the fires burn lower than usual. Picture Kale walking through the servants' passages, his hand brushing lightly against the familiar texture of old walls, his steps silent, not by effort, but by nature. Now, for he is no longer learning how to be invisible, he simply is. Kale moves through a place where time seems slower, where no trumpet sounds, no guards shout, only the whisper of cloaks and the occasional scrape of a chair from rooms never entered. This is the space between power as display and power as maintenance, the kitchens that never sleep, the linen closets too large to count, the forgotten hallways used only by those who know their value. And Kale is one of those few who not only know, but understand them. Deeply each night, he maps anew the rhythms of this place, not because they change so often, but because they change just enough. The gardener who once passed through the courtyard now limps slightly, the cook who once laughed at dawn now says nothing, the steward who used to take his tea at the third bell now drinks only water. And it is in these shifts that Kale reads the truth, not in proclamations, not in law, not in books, but in footsteps and absences, in movements and murmurs. He watches from the high rafters of the main hall, the place where nobles gather to weigh decisions, pretending at justice in their robes. And Ring's Kale is not angry with them. He does not mock them. He only watches their truths unravel over time, like threads pulled gently from cloth. How a man speaks bravely when no one is listening, how a woman praises mercy while signing orders that ensure its absence. How alliances form in the shape of glances and fall apart in the space between handshakes. His role is not to expose them nor to protect them, but to ensure that the gap between what is said and what is done never becomes so wide that no one can see across it. Kale is not a reformer, nor a spy, nor a judge. He is simply the memory of things unsaid, the eyes that remember who was where when the wind shifted, who stayed quiet when courage was needed, and who opened a door when none should have been opened at all. On certain nights, Kale slips into the music rooms, not to steal, not to destroy, But to listen, the nobles believe these rooms are private places where only music and wine speak freely. But Cale knows better. He knows that musicians whisper as they tune their instruments, that maids sometimes sit at the harpsichord after dark and play pieces they learned in childhood, and that power hums differently when it believes itself unobserved one such night. He watches a young noble woman play not with skill, but with grief. Her fingers tremble over the keys, as if each note carries a weight too deep for words, and Cale does not step forward, he only listens, and he remembers that even within the palace there are hearts unarmored by gold. Even among the highborn there are those who weep in silence. And that too is part of the truth. He carries the truth of what power costs even to those who seem to have everything. He sometimes visits the upper towers long after the candles are out, when the guards sleep upright in their chairs and the wind hums low through the arrow slits from here. Cale can see the whole city as if it were no more than a tangle of veins, each alley a memory, each rooftop a secret. He closes his eyes and listens to the city not with ears, but with instinct. He feels its breath, its worry, its hope, and somewhere deep beneath all, that he hears the rhythm of the palace's pulse, steady, slow, but no longer unchallenged. Cale has learned to read not only faces, but spaces. He notices when a room has been swept too clean, when a window has not fogged like the others, when a hallway once noisy is now still. He marks these changes not with suspicion, but with care, as one would note the health of an old friend. The details tell him not of threats, but of shifts, and it is these shifts that matter most, for Cale understands that upheaval begins not with battles, but with imbalance. There are moments when Cale rests in hidden alcoves above the great library, where the oldest books sleep beneath dust and silence. He runs his fingers along the edges of forgotten ledgers, along maps. That chart, not land, but influence. And there he understands more clearly that history is not a straight path, but a spiral returning again and again to the same choices, the same illusions, the same quiet pleas for someone to see what lies beneath. He does not seek to interrupt that spiral. He knows he cannot stop its turning, but he can place a single thread through its center, a thread of memory, of presence, of quiet reminder that not all was hidden, not all was accepted, not all slipped away, unnoticed, that someone saw and remembered, and that sometimes is enough. In the lower chambers he hears the stories told by those who clean and carry, those who mend and serve. He listens as they speak of lords who weep in secret, and ladies who tremble before guests arrive. He hears of a prince who dreams of leaving it all, and a soldier who prays not for victory, but for peace. And these stories Cale gathers not for leverage, not for gain, but for understanding, because these are the stories of the human heart. Unguarded, Cale sees the palace in layers now, not of stone and cloth, but of breath and fear and longing and hope. He sees the boy in the kitchen who hides a song within his chores, and the woman who places a single flower in the same spot every day. And when someone else begins to do the same, Cale notices. He notices because these small things matter, because they are proof that beneath power lies yearning, and that yearning deserves to be witnessed. He understands, now more than ever, that his survival, his skill, his silence have made him not less human, but more. He is not untouched by what he sees. He does not remain distant out of coldness, but out of care, because to intervene is to risk changing what must unfold. And Cale's purpose has never been to control, but to accompany, to walk beside the unfolding, without pressing too hard, without demanding to be seen. So he walks through the palace, each night with eyes open to beauty as much as danger, with a heart open to kindness as much as betrayal. He sees the world for what it is, not perfect, not fair, but full of small choices that shape great outcomes. And in that quiet awareness, Cale becomes not the assassin of legend, not the myth, but the thread that holds stories together without ever becoming the story itself. And in the mornings, when the city stirs and the palace stretches its limbs, Cale watches from a high window, and he feels not triumph, not pride, but peace, for he knows that he has done what he must, that he has been present where presence was needed, silent where silence mattered, and that the truths he carries, though unspoken, have weight. As you drift now into stillness, let your mind follow him into that labyrinth of halls and hearths, into that place where power moves quietly and choices echo forever. See him not as a shadow, but as a presence, not as a figure of fear, but of knowing. Feel his breath in the hush of the corridors, his eyes in the pauses between words, his hands folded not in anger, but in patience. And let his story hold you in that peace. Kale survives not by defiance, but by attunement, not by strength, but by steadiness, not by conquest, but by comprehension. And that survival becomes a legacy, one whispered, not shouted, one lived, not told. And as you close your eyes and the world softens around, you remember that even among the powerful, even among the cruel, there are those like Kale who walk only to witness, only to remember, only to keep the threads from fraying too far apart. Beneath the throne's shadow, Kale and the echoes that remain. Imagine the final days of winter settling over the city like a heavy quilt, soft and unmoving. The palace no longer shimmers with celebration the way it does in high summer. There are no festivals, now no feasts filling the halls, only the creak of old wood expanding in the cold, and the hush of breath fogging gently in. Corridors where frost lingers even indoors. This is when the world slows, and this is when Kale moves most freely, for winter has always belonged to him. He has long since ceased counting the years since he first arrived in these halls, not as a servant, not as a noble, but as something that does not quite belong. And yet Kale now knows these stones better than the architect who laid them. He knows how cold seeps into the walls, and where the wind always hums low behind the painted panels. He knows which beams will groan in the dark, and which ones never make a sound, no matter how hard they are leaned upon. Kale walks through the palace, not only as a witness now, but as a memory made flesh. He is the reminder that silence too can endure, that observation itself can become history. Each night he carries the sum of 1,000 small things. A glance between enemies, the stillness after an argument, the way a certain name causes a voice to lower, and those 1,000 pieces fit together, not into a weapon, but into understanding. He returns to places he once learned, in the long-forgotten corners where kitchens used to heat meals for kings and queens, long dead, now only mice and dust keep company there. But Kale remembers. He remembers the lessons he learned crouched in those dark places, the faces he saw, the fears he absorbed, not his own, but those of others. He learned then that those in power carry their dread like perfume, invisible, yet heavy, present, even when masked by jewels and silk. His work no longer requires urgency. Kale has become so much a part of the palace's quiet rhythm that even its heartbeat would falter if he were to vanish now. He does not act in haste nor in reaction. He observes as the palace breathes, as alliances shift with the seasons, and rumors flutter like leaves through stone courtyards. And all the while he listens, watches records in the private chambers of his mind. Beneath the throne room itself, a place no one enters, lies an archive, not of documents, but of memories. Invisible yet real, Kale has walked there countless times, not physically, but through the traces left behind, the weight in the floorboards, the impression of arguments long settled, the residue of decision and regret. Kale walks through these echoes and adds his own stillness to theirs. He does not disturb them, he joins them. He has learned to read voices like weather, the hesitation before a name, the catch in the throat when a lie is spoken, the change in breathing that comes when truth is suppressed. He hears them all and holds them not as secrets, but as parts of the whole. He guards not people, but patterns, and those patterns tell him more than any document ever could. He understands now that every betrayal begins with discomfort, and every uprising with silence. When a noble begins to smile too often, Kale notices when another grows still too suddenly. He watches when two old enemies begin to speak again, not with friendship, but calculation. Kale understands what this means, not because he predicts the future, but because he recognizes repetition, the way the past echoes through the present, like a forgotten song hummed in a stairwell. He knows, too, that his presence changes things even without action. He sees the way some turn away when they feel him near, though they cannot prove he is there. He sees how letters are burned instead of hidden, how voices drop when they think they are alone. He does not crave this fear, nor does he revel in it, but he respects it. It means he is no longer just watching. He is being watched, even if never seen. There are those who believe Cale does not age, that he is a myth, some whisper of him, as a ghost, some believe. He is merely a story told to keep ambition in check. Cale has heard it all. He does not correct them. He does not emerge to clarify. He lets the stories grow because stories have their own power. And in those stories, Cale survives longer than any flesh ever could, yet Cale is not a myth. He is a man with hands that tremble in the cold. Just like any other, he eats, simply sleeps lightly, and walks often. He has no grand chamber, no wealth, only the deep familiarity of stone and shadow and memory. And that is enough. It must be enough, for Cale never sought glory, only continuation, only to ensure that the world did not drift too far from its truths. In quiet moments, he still returns to the edge of the city, where the wind is stronger and the stars clearer from. This vantage point, the palace seems small, not insignificant, but fragile, like something that could be swept away by one deep breath. And he reflects, not on his accomplishments, but on the simple fact that he has remained, that he has endured not through strength, but attentiveness, not through command, but awareness sometimes. He helps in ways no one will ever know. A letter redirected, a key misplaced, a meeting delayed. He does not interfere openly. He does not decide outcomes, but sometimes he gently adjusts the rhythm, so that those who might suffer may find rest, so that those who hunger for harm may be made to wait just long enough for doubt to settle in their hearts. He becomes a pause, and in that pause lives the chance for mercy. Cale watches a young steward rise through the ranks, one who reminds him of himself, not in skill or silence, but in eyes that notice too. Much Cale leaves no mark of encouragement, no words, only the absence of obstacles. And this too is part of his work, to ensure that others may follow their own quiet paths without falling too soon into the jaws of consequence. His days pass now in deeper stillness. Sometimes an entire week moves by without anyone realizing he was ever present, yet decisions shift slightly, directions change. Subtly Cale remains, as he always has, not at the center, but beside it, never seeking control, only balance, only truth. As spring nears and the frost begins to recede, the palace wakes once more from its winter quiet. Flowers return to windows. Laughter begins again in courtyards, and Cale watches it all with calm, not detachment, but acceptance. He knows this season as well as any other, and he knows that for all its color, spring too carries its shadows behind the sunlit arches, behind the blooming vines. There are still corridors where secrets settle like dust, and so he continues each night as the city sleeps, as the palace hums faintly with dreams and footsteps. Cale walks, not because he must, but because this is his rhythm, his breath, his place. He does not belong to the throne, nor to the people, nor even to the past. He belongs to the thread that runs through all of them, the invisible thread that keeps memory alive, that ensures silence is not forgotten. And now, as you let your own breath slow, feel the cold stones beneath your feet here, the hush of old halls filled with half-spoken truths. Imagine Cale there walking with you, not before, not behind, but beside you, as if to say, this too is a place worth watching, this too is a story worth hearing, even if no one ever speaks. It allowed Cale lives not in legend, but in the quiet turning of history, in the choices made without audience, in the kindnesses given without name, in the weight of what is carried unseen. And if you listen closely to the hush that surrounds you now, you might just hear his footsteps fading softly into the dark, not as an ending, but as a continuation, as the quiet presence that always was, and always was, and always will be beneath the shadow of power, the cloak beneath the cross. Kale in the shadows of faith and fire, in the flicker of candles. Kale within. The walls of belief imagine the soft echo of footsteps in an old stone. Monastery cold underfoot and forever damp with age. The air is not bitter, but deeply still heavy with incense and ash, and the ghost of ancient prayers now just murmurs, caught in the vaulted ceiling far above. This is not a place of action, not a place of bloodshed or flame. It is a sanctuary for thought, for ritual, for faith. And yet even here Kale walks silent and unseen, a presence not opposed to belief, but made cautious by its certainty. He moves not as an intruder, but as a ghost of the world outside, slipping past rows of flickering candles, past alcoves, where monks kneel in silence, cloaked in wool and purpose. Kale wears no emblem, no token of the crown, no mark of nation or family. He is dressed, instead, in patience and memory, in the thick folds of a cloak that does not rustle, even when the wind presses against it. He belongs here only as much as smoke does welcome and ungraspable. The monastery stands at the edge of a high hill, wrapped by forests and forgotten roads, its towers catching the light only at dawn and dusk, and never quite in full. The bells toll not in celebration, but in rhythm, a reminder that time still passes even when the world seems. Still Kale listens to them each morning, and each evening their tone guiding his steps, reminding him not of duty, but of breath, of repetition, of the slow deep pacing that his life has become. His reasons for being here are as quiet as his movements, not sent to kill, not summoned to spy. He has come to witness, to understand, to study the spaces where faith and power weave together, not always visibly, but deeply. Kale knows that belief can build cities, but it can also sharpen daggers. He knows that fear masked as holiness can be the most dangerous thing a man may carry, and so he watches. There is a scriptorium in the southern wing, a place of endless parchment and whispered learning. Kale sits sometimes above it in the beams where no light reaches, and watches ink dry. He listens to the scraping of quills, to the careful unfolding of vellum. He reads, not with eyes, but with silence, and he has learned more from the margins of those pages than from any loud proclamation. He has heard what is edited, what is erased, what is written again more carefully. Kale walks the gardens where the monks tend herbs, not for flavor, but for healing. They do not speak as they work, but their hands move with the assurance of those who understand time, not as a river, but as a field to be tended. Kale watches as they pass roots from palm to palm, as they whisper to each other in a language, not of words, but of glances. He learns which plants calm the mind, which warm the blood, which bring dreams, and which chase them. Away he takes none of them. He steals nothing, he touches nothing, and yet he gathers all of it in the quiet space behind his eyes. Because he understands now that survival is not only in evasion or precision, but in understanding and absorbing what is not taught, openly but shown slowly with care. In the refectory where meals are shared, Kale eats in silence. Beside them he wears a robe borrowed from storage, one that smells of old fires and lavender, and he listens to their voices as they discuss the weather, the readings, the progress of the younger novices. He hears when one speaks too loudly or too carefully. He notes when another corrects with kindness or with edge, and through these tones Kale maps their hearts. He does not look for betrayal. He does not expect sin, but he understands that where many live together, even in devotion, there will be longing, there will be regret, and sometimes regret becomes anger, and anger seeks a shape, and he has seen too often what shape it takes when left unguarded on the coldest nights. Kale walks the chapel steps after the bells have ceased, and the wind breathes loud between the towers. He walks because the cold sharpens his thoughts, not his pain, but his presence he feels. The stone beneath him, the wind against his face, the sound of old prayers caught in doorways, and he lets them pass through him, not clinging, not resisting, simply present. One night, as snow began to fall, he found himself in the chapel alone. Only the flicker of 2 candles near the altar remained, and Kale sat not at the front, but near the back where the shadows are thicker. and the warmth from the candles. Does not reach? He listened to the creak of the wood as it shifted against itself, and to the faint whisper of wind finding cracks in the old stained glass, and in that silence he did not see clarity, only stillness. He thinks of the times he has been hunted, and the fewer times he has hunted, and how different. Those moments are from this one, because here in the house of belief, there is no pursuit, only reflection, and that too has its weight. Cale does not fear it. But he does not surrender to it either. He lets it sit beside him like another monk, silent and breathing slow through the days. He studies their rituals not with suspicion, but with interest. He watches how water is poured, how candles are lit, how the cloth is folded and refolded each time. With the same care he learns the meaning of gestures, the rhythm of chants, the pattern of incense smoke, and he comes to see how these acts are not performance, but devotion, not habit, but language. Cale walks beneath the great bell tower where names of the dead are whispered into the wind. He reads the stones not for their dates, but for what is not said, the missing names, the changed titles, the faint carvings worn smooth by time, and in these absences, he finds more than any list could give. He sees the hand that carved them, the mind that chose to alter or erase, and from this he learns not what is declared, but what is hidden. As the cold deepens and the snow thickens, the monastery quiets even further. The monks speak lest their movements grow slower, and Cale finds his own rhythm slowing with them. He no longer plans, only listens, only observes the rhythm of breath, the weight of footsteps, the temperature of silence, and from these things he draws meaning more lasting than commands. He watches the younger novices in their training, fumbling through chants, struggling with old texts. Cale sees not their flaws, but their forming. He remembers when he too was young and full of questions, and he wonders who among them might one day walk a path like his, not through shadow, but through observation, not with daggers, but with quiet truths. And in these quiet moments, he is no longer alone. He walks with the memory of those who came before, and with the possibility of those who may come after. And this too is part of his work, not to be the last, but to be a bridge to ensure that whatever comes next carries with it the quiet awareness that silence is not emptiness, but fullness waiting to be known when he finally leaves the monastery. It is not with farewell, but with breath. He slips away through the gate before dawn, his cloak catching the wind, his footsteps silent in the snow, and behind him the bells remain still, but Cale carries their weight, their rhythm, their story, and he adds it to the ones he already holds. And as you rest, now imagine him walking again this time down a snow-covered path between trees heavy with frost. Feel the cold not as sharp, but as clean here. The silence not as empty, but as sacred. And know that even in places built for prayer, there is space for watchers, for witnesses, for those who hold stories without needing to speak. Them Cale moves onward, not because the task is done, but because the journey is never complete, and every silence, every stone, every flicker of light in the dark is part of the path he follows. And so he walks always not to be seen, but to remain. And in his remaining, the world is just a little more known. The silence after the sermon. Cale among the fanatics and the forgotten. Imagine now the world beyond that monastery, a place where faith is no longer quiet, where belief is not whispered between stones, but shouted from towers, written in flame, etched into flesh. The cities that rise beyond those hills where Cale once walked in silence have grown louder, more certain, and more dangerous. And Cale must walk here, too, for not all faith is still, not all devotion is gentle. Some have taken belief and carved it into edges sharper than steel. He enters the outer city of Venchel, not by gate nor horse, but by following the bones of an old aqueduct long since buried. Beneath market stalls and tenement alleys, the stone arches once carried clean water. Now they carry shadow and decay, and it is through this hidden skeleton that Cale moves crouched, low beneath stone, dripping with mold and history. He finds his way into the arteries of a city gone blind with purpose. Venchel is a place of banners and ash, each corner draped in doctrine, the faces of saints sewn into tapestries, the names of martyrs burned into wooden walls. Sermons are shouted from balconies, not read nor reflected upon, but hurled with anger like warnings, and every street corner bears. A preacher, not a teacher, and every listener does not learn they fear. They nod not from understanding, but from hope that the nod will spare them. The pain of being noticed. Cale sees it all the way children repeat the phrases with more dread than conviction. The way shopkeepers keep one hand hidden beneath counters, not to grasp coins, but to grip tokens of faith as if to ward off judgment. And behind every window, someone waits to be told they are wrong or worse, unfaithful in this place. Belief is not sanctuary. It is surveillance. He moves not with haste, but with precision, following rhythms. He senses rather than hears. The way crowds thicken near the bread, stalls at dusk. The way guards rotate not by hour, but by sermon length. He watches the path of smoke and learns where the chimneys warm more than ovens. He watches faces, not expressions, but tension in the jaw, cracks in posture, fingers that twitch, not from cold, but caution, in a cellar 3 floors beneath a dying lantern. He meets those who whisper truths. Cale does not speak, he only listens. A woman who once copied sacred texts now burns, her fingers sewing false pages to protect those hunted. A boy with a stammer who mimics sermons flawlessly to deceive his way into restricted chambers, an old man who walks with a limp but once ran messages through tunnels. No map dares to show these are not fighters, they are survivors. Like Cale, each has chosen the quiet over the flame. Cale offers no comfort, only presence. He does not instruct or lead, but becomes a breath in their rhythm, a reminder that they are not unseen, and when they sleep, when one of them wakes, gasping from a dream too full of fire and memory, Cale is already standing in the shadows near the door, silent not as a ghost, but as something more human, something constant above them. The bells ring not for celebration, but command each toll marking a decree, a punishment, a prayer made mandatory, and the crowds move not from joy, but from duty and fear. Cale watches as a child drops a gloved token in the street and does not stop to retrieve it, and he knows that this is not forgetfulness, but survival, and he bends low and picks it up, pressing it into the mud where no eye will catch it. There are streets where the stone itself is warm, not from sun, but from the fires that never cease, flames kept alive in iron cages, where old pages are burned each morning, where names are whispered before being erased, and Cale walks past them each morning before the light breaks, feeling the heat not on his skin, but in his breath. He finds rooms with hidden panels and empty bookshelves, where ink still lingers, though the parchment is gone, and he traces stories written not in text, but in ash, in the soot that clings to corners, in the pattern of nails once used to hang banners. Long since removed, he enters the sanctum of a great hall, where sermons echo against high ceilings, and eyes stare not at the altar, but at each other, for trust is a vanishing thing, and even faith now wears armor. Cale walks through it, not as a believer, but as a shadow within the congregation, learning how fear masquerades as piety, how silence can be a scream. There is a garden behind the hall, where no one is meant to walk, a place left to overgrow, as though even nature must kneel, and Cale walks. There in the quiet he remembers the monastery, the way snow softened even stone, the way breath steamed in slow rhythm here. The air is too warm, the ground dry, and cracked the trees heavy but still, and even birds seem to sing not out of joy, but habit. Cale sits there sometimes among the ruins of what once was beauty, not to mourn, but to remember to anchor himself in contrast. For if all the world begins to burn, he must carry within him the memory of still water, of snow on moss, of candlelight, not born of ritual but comfort. He meets a priest once who does not speak, who only writes his sermons and sets them down at street corners unsigned and unread, and Cale reads them, all not for guidance, but for rhythm, for the way the words flow like old stream beds, long dried, and yet still etched into the land he commits. them to memory, not because they are sacred, but because they are real. As night deepens and guards grow weary, Cale walks rooftops, not to reach destinations, but to listen to the city breathe from above. He sees the fires glowing in squares, the lines of people waiting to confess not sins, but doubts. He watches shadows move behind windows and learns again the ways people live when they believe no one watches. And still he does. He finds again the quiet he once knew, not in peace, but in the knowing and the certainty that his path still matters, that his silence still holds shape, that his presence can be a weight that keeps even a city from tilting into oblivion. He writes nothing. He carves no mark. But when he leaves the city, the wind shifts slightly in the alleys, and the bells ring just off their usual time, and somewhere a sermon is delayed, and no one knows why, but Cale does, and it is enough as you rest now. Feel the warmth of the fire, not as threat, but memory. Feel the hush of belief before it hardens into command. Hear the steps of Cale on stone. High above the city, not as hunter, but as witness, and know that even among the loudest of faiths, there is space for quiet. There is room for one who watches and does not speak. And in that silence, you might hear not only Cale, but yourself, for the path he walks is not marked by names or glory, but by presence, and the choice to remain unseen and yet always present. The last frost, Cale's quiet passage through the end of an age when the city stilled. Cale and the echoes of the dying world. Imagine now a time when the roads lie empty, not from fear, but from exhaustion, when the cities no longer roar, but sigh, when the banners that once fluttered from the highest towers hang tattered and silent. This is the world Cale steps into, a world not defined by battle or belief, but by endings, a soft hush after too many fires have burned, a stillness that follows not victory, but surrender to the slow passage of time itself. Cale walks now not between enemies or allies, but between ruins and memories. He passes through villages where shutters swing loose on their hinges, where the air carries not the scent of hearth smoke, but the faint presence of long, untouched earth. He moves through markets where no feet have trod for weeks, where the wind has grown bold and learned the paths once familiar to people who no longer walk them. He does not rush for. There is no urgency, only presence, only the quiet patience of one who has outlived purpose, yet remains moving. Still, it is not plague, nor war, nor decree that has silenced the world, but something older, deeper, a weariness in the very bones of the land itself crops. No longer rot, but simply fail to sprout. Wells offer water, but it tastes of stone and absence. The sky turns gray, not with storm, but with stillness, and people begin to vanish not in violence, but by their own choice. One by one, families close their doors and never open them again. Some walk into forests and do not return. Others simply sit and stop. Cale does not seek answers. He knows some questions are not meant to be solved, only witnessed. He keeps to the roads when they are still visible and not claimed by moss or shifting stone. He marks the passing days not by sunrise, but by the way frost thickens, the way birds no longer call in the morning, but only once before dusk is cloak. Heavier now, patched and layered with the memories of many winters. It holds warmth, not just from wool, but from the lives he has walked beside. He meets fewer people, but those he does meet look at him not with suspicion or curiosity, but with quiet recognition. They do not ask who he is or where he goes. They only nod as though to say, yes, we too are still here. For now, and that is enough. They share what they can: a piece of bread, a place by the fire, the last of a jar of salt. And Cale never asks for more, never lingers longer than needed in one town. Cale finds a bell tower with no bell. The frame still stands empty, and he climbs not to look for enemies, but to see how far the world stretches still. The fields below lie untended, dotted with blackened stumps of once thriving orchards. The river winds without witness, and the bridge that once sang with carts and hooves lies silent beneath him. From this height, Cale feels not sorrow, but clarity, a kind of understanding that this too is part of the rhythm. He stays the night in the tower, wrapped tight against the cold, and listens to the wind pass through the empty frame. Where the bell once hung, it makes no music, only a soft whistle. But in that sound, Cale hears something familiar, not hope exactly, but memory of purpose of a world that once made noise and now chooses rest further. Along, Cale finds a monastery, like the one he once knew, but hollowed even more fully. Its doors stand open not from invitation, but because no one remains to close them. The altar is dust, the candles collapsed, the scrolls crumbled, but Cale steps inside, not as trespasser, but guest returning late. He kneels where the floorboards still hold firm and stays, not praying, but listening. The silence welcomes him as one of its own. He walks through forests. Again, but these are older, denser, the trees here. Remember things even Cale does not, their roots rise like questions, and their branches hold the weight of many winters. He moves slowly, placing each foot with care, not from fear, but reverence. No trails remain, only instinct, only the pull of places that feel familiar, even when they should not. He remembers names not spoken aloud in years, sees faces behind his eyes, not of those lost to time or blade, but those who watched with him, sat beside him in silence, who shared nothing but warmth and presence. He carries them now not as ghosts, but as echoes, a soft constellation, guiding his steps without light. One night Cale dreams of the sea, though he has never seen it, dreams of waves that speak in languages older than stone salt that burns clean through memory, and a horizon that promises not arrival, but endless movement. He wakes with the taste of that dream still on his lips, wondering if such a place exists, or if the dream itself is enough. He walks into cities where snow drifts against doorways, untouched windows, covered not by boards, but by frost thick enough to hold shapes of forgotten. Breath, Cale moves not as one searching, but as one bearing witness to endings. He watches ivy claim the faces of statues, birds nest in hollows of grand halls, and he does not disturb, does not judge. Their stillness only moves through it, as gently as shadow. In a high place called Valmura, Cale finds a library built into the bones of a mountain, the door fallen, the wind slipping freely between shelves once full, many books gone. Some remain, but pages stick together, words smeared into smudges of thought. Cale reads, then not for content, but comfort. The way his eyes move across lines gives him the rhythm of what once was. He lights no fire that night, lets cold settle around him, wrapped in every layer. He listens to groans of timber and stone, as wind makes mountains speak, and in that sound finds no fear, only recognition of age. Weight, silence stretching beyond any human measure. Each step now feels not heavier but slower, as if time itself has grown thick like honey. Each action deliberate, not from caution, but care. Cale no longer sharpens blades or carries tools. Instead, he carries small tokens, a piece of ribbon once tied around, a letter, a coin, without minting, a shard of colored glass found near a river. These things matter not for use, but for stories, memories they keep. He helps where he can, when hands remain to hold water buckets, when shoulders are still there to share burdens. But mostly he observes, and that is enough. For in a world growing, still the act of noticing becomes sacred. He sees the way vines curl through broken windows, dew clings to blades of grass longer than before the stars burn. Just slightly closer now one morning, as frost hangs thick and breath of earth feels suspended, Cale stands at the edge of a long abandoned outpost. Looks not forward, but inward. He no longer seeks the next place, the next task. Instead, breathes in the stillness and allows himself to feel the weight of years, not as burden, but as thread along, unbroken lines stretching behind and before him. And as you rest now, let the quiet of this fading world wrap around your thoughts. Let the hush of snow and stone settle in your chest. Imagine Cale walking still somewhere unseen and unhurried, not to reach a place, but to carry presence, to be a silent rhythm in a world that has forgotten its own music. He is not lost. He is not waiting. He is simply here, as always, moving through the breath between moments. And in that breath, there is peace, the weight of silence. Cal's journey beyond the shadows. Imagine now the world draped in a heavier silence than before, a silence so thick it seems to press gently against the skin, a quiet that settles not suddenly, but like the slow fall of snowflakes, drifting with the faintest whisper of wind. This is the world Cal moves through now, a world growing dimmer, yet still breathing with the faint pulse of life beneath its still surface. Cal's footsteps are softer, now more deliberate, each one placed with care, as if not to disturb the fragile balance of a world that holds its breath. He moves through forgotten paths, where moss-carpet stones and wildflowers push through cracks in cobblestone streets. The air is cool and sharp, with the scent of frost and earth, mingled with the distant aroma of decaying wood and the subtle sweetness of late autumn leaves pressed beneath his worn boots. The days have shortened their light, growing thin and pale, but Cal walks on undeterred, guided not by sun or stars, but by the rhythm of his own breath, the steady beat of a heart that has learned to measure time not in moments, but in memories. The faint echo of voices once heard, the soft imprint of hands once held the weight of promises, made beneath darker skies in a small village, resting in the hollow of a mountain. Cal pauses. He watches smoke curl from chimneys thick and slow, as if reluctant to rise to the cold sky. He notices the shuttered windows worn from wind and rain, the narrow streets empty, but for a few scattered leaves swirling like whispers across cold stone. The people who remain are few, and they move with a quiet urgency that speaks of exhaustion, yet also a stubborn spark of resilience that refuses to be snuffed out. Cal remembers the faces of those he once knew here, old friends and silent allies, those who shared secrets beneath moonlight and dangers spoken only in hushed tones. He feels their absence as a hollow ache, not sharp, but constant like the chill that creeps beneath skin in the dead of night. He breathes in slowly, letting the memories settle beside him like old companions who walk just out of sight. The village holds stories etched in every cracked wall and worn doorstep, tales of survival stitched into the fabric of everyday life. The way the children once laughed, chasing through narrow alleys, the way elders gathered by the fire, sharing tales and songs that carried hope across harsh winters. These echoes linger still in the silence, carried by the wind like forgotten melodies that drift from one empty room to another. Cal moves forward through the skeletal remains of once vibrant marketplaces, where fruit carts lie overturned, their wooden wheels broken, and still the faint scent of herbs lingers, mingled with the dampness of forgotten cloths and the earth, reclaiming all it once gave away here. And their wild animals have begun to roam freely, their cautious eyes reflecting the quiet world that humans have slowly relinquished. He passes a well where water still trickles clear and cold, a rare blessing in these days. A place where travelers once gathered, sharing news and news of battles distant and near, but now a place of solitude, where Cal pauses to cup his hands and drink. Deep the cold liquid, carrying with it the taste of stone and something older, the essence of endurance and quiet hope. As night approaches, the chill deepens and Cal finds shelter beneath the skeletal remains of a stone chapel, its roof collapsed, but walls still standing like weary guardians of a forgotten faith. Inside, the faint scent of old incense mingles with the sharp bite of cold stone. His footsteps echo softly against the cracked floor as he lays down carefully, wrapping himself in his thick cloak, feeling the familiar weight of solitude pressing gently but not unkindly against his shoulders. He dreams that night not of battles or faces, but of silence itself, a vast and endless quiet that stretches across the hills and valleys like a soft blanket covering the scars of a long and painful past. In the dream, he walks through fields of frost-covered grass, each blade shimmering with the faintest light, each step leaving a gentle imprint, as if even the earth remembers his passage. He wakes to a sky pale and wide, the first light touching the tops of distant mountains with a gentle glow. Cal rises slowly, adjusting the layers of his cloak, feeling the familiar ache of muscles hardened by years of travel and vigilance, but also a deep calm born from acceptance. The acceptance that this journey is no longer about conquest or survival, but about bearing witness to the final chapters of a world fading quietly into memory. He moves on guided by instinct and the faint echoes of footsteps long since vanished. His path takes him through forests thick with ancient trees, their trunks gnarled and twisted yet strong, their leaves whispering secrets in the cold breeze. Cale listens. Carefully, the sounds like a slow conversation between earth and sky, a language only those who have truly listened can understand. The forest is alive in a way it has not been for years. Birds flit between branches, their calls soft but persistent. Small animals scurry beneath fallen leaves, and moss patches the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood, reminding Cale of beginnings even as the world around him fades toward its end. He finds a clearing bathed in pale light where snowflakes drift lazily like feathers, landing gently upon a carpet of moss and pine needles here. He pauses, taking a moment to close his eyes and breathe deeply, the stillness wrapping around him like a familiar embrace. He feels the rhythm of his own heartbeat, sensing with the slow pulse of the forest, a reminder that even in endings, there is continuity, a thread weaving past and future. Cale recalls the lessons learned over years spent in shadows. The art of patience, the skill of waiting and watching, the understanding that sometimes the greatest power lies not in action, but in stillness. He remembers the faces of those who taught him this, the quiet mentors who spoke more in silence than words, the companions who shared the long nights by flickering fires, their presence a steady anchor in a world of shifting shadows. He continues his journey, leaving the clearing behind, moving now with a lightness born of surrender to the slow unfolding of time. His steps take him to the banks of a frozen river, its surface cracked and uneven, reflecting the pale winter sky. Cale traces the line of the ice with a gloved hand, feeling the cold seep through the fabric, a sharp contrast to the warmth held deep within. He knows this river once carried the hopes and fears of many, flowing steadily toward distant horizons. Now it lies still, a mirror to the quiet world, a reminder of movement paused but not ended. He steps carefully along its edge, mindful of each footfall, the crunch of frozen grass underfoot, the whisper of wind weaving through bare branches as the days grow shorter and the nights colder. Cale feels the weight of silence deepen, yet he does not retreat. He embraces the stillness, finding in it a new kind of strength, a slow unfolding of presence that does not demand noise or recognition, but simply exists as a part of the vast quiet. He thinks often of those who came before, those who walked paths hidden and unknown, whose names have faded like footprints in snow, yet whose stories remain written in the very fabric of the land. He carries their memory, gently like a flame flickering against the dark, holding it close not to burn, but to illuminate the path ahead. One evening, as the sun dips below a horizon shrouded in mist, Cale stands atop a ridge looking out over valleys, cloaked in shadow, the wind stirring the loose strands of his cloak, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and earth. He breathes deeply, feeling the cold air fill his lungs, the sharp clarity of the moment grounding him in the present. Even as he carries the weight of all that has passed, he knows the journey is far from over, yet he no longer seeks an end, a destination. Instead, he moves forward with quiet purpose, guided by the soft rhythm of a world in transition, a world balancing delicately between what was and what may yet be. And as you rest now, let the stillness of Cale's journey settle gently over your thoughts. Imagine yourself walking beside him, feeling the cold air brush your face, hearing the soft crunch of snow beneath your feet, the quiet whisper of the wind carrying stories of endings and beginnings. And know that in the breath between moments, there is peace. Cale moves on, unseen, unhurried, a shadow in the fading light, a silent rhythm in the last frost, a reminder that even as the world grows, still life continues quietly, patiently, endlessly. The quiet that remains. Cale's final journey beneath the sleeping sky. Imagine now Cale rising before the sun, not to begin something new, but to continue something ancient. His eyes open to the colorless light of a winter morning, where even the wind seems unsure whether to stir or wait. He does not rush. He does not stretch his limbs like a man preparing for hardship. Instead, he gathers his cloak and folds it with slow fingers over his shoulders, like drawing memory across his back, and he steps forward, not because he must, but because that is what his body knows to do. Each breath is a cloud in the cold air, and each footstep a letter pressed softly into the snow. The path before him is neither clear nor obscured. It is simply there, not marked by purpose or destination, but by the soft rhythm of movement. He passes a row of wooden posts once meant to carry light, now leaning at odd angles, their heads bowed as though in mourning for the days when their glow meant safety and return. Cale does not touch them, but walks beside them as if keeping quiet company. He comes to a place where the trees grow crooked, where the branches reach like fingers twisted by time and frost, and he walks beneath them slowly, as though entering a cathedral not of stone, but of shadow and wind. The snow falls gently through the cracks above and lands upon his hood, his shoulders, his hands like old friends. Arriving one by one to sit in silence beside him, he does not brush them away. Instead, he carries them until they melt into the warmth he keeps within. He follows the edge of a frozen stream, one he remembers crossing many years ago in the dead of another winter, when he was younger and leaner and quicker to draw his blade. The stream now carries only silence under its frozen skin, and Cale listens to it the way he might listen to a distant voice from a room he can no longer enter. He kneels at its edge and places his palm flat against the ice, and in that moment, he is not a shadow, not an assassin, not a survivor, but simply a man with his hand on the pulse of something older than himself. Farther along, he finds the remains of a cart, its wooden frame half buried in snow, its wheels broken, and its cargo long gone, scattered by time or taken by those who passed through before him. He does not wonder what it once carried. He only sits beside it, resting his back against its side as if against an old companion, and he closes his eyes not to sleep, but to remember the feeling of stillness before every step, before every choice he ever made. The sky turns gray, and then blue, and then gray again, and Cale walks through it all as if it were the same sky, dressed in different silence. He climbs a slope that overlooks a valley once filled with lights, once dotted with fields and smoke and laughter, and now only marked by the gentle curves of land softened by snow and time. He stands at the ridge and lets the wind move through him, not against him, not around him, but through him, as if he has become a part of the weather itself. At night he builds no fire. He wraps himself in furs and lays upon a bed of pine needles and snow packed carefully, so as not to melt too quickly, and he watches. The stars appear one by one, not naming them, not counting them, only watching like a child, seeing them for the first time. And when he closes his eyes, the stars remain burned into the darkness behind his lids and follow him into his dreams, in his dreams. Now there are no blades, no running, no whispers of danger. There are only rooms filled with quiet breath halls, where shadows move without purpose, gardens where frost clings to every branch, but nothing breaks, nothing bleeds. He dreams of footsteps in snow that never melt, of doors that open into nothing, and of voices speaking words he once knew but no longer needs to understand. And he wakes with those sounds still echoing in his chest, like birds that once sang in the morning. He passes an orchard where the trees are bare and the fences fallen, and he walks among them, slowly placing his hand on each trunk as he goes, not to bless them, not to mark them, but simply to acknowledge them, to say, yes, I see you, and I remember what it meant to stand tall in the cold. He finds a wooden swing hanging from one tree, still swaying gently in the breeze, though no child has touched it in years, and he sits there for a time, letting the motion carry him back and forth, not far, not fast, just enough to remember what it feels like to be moved by something other than need. He walks until his legs ache, and then farther he eats when food appears, and drinks when water finds him. He speaks aloud only when the silence feels too complete, and even then only to the wind. to the trees, to the frost that clings to his lashes. He says things like, "I remember this place, and I wonder if that roof still holds," and sometimes only hello or thank you, and in doing so he fills the world with just enough sound to remind it that he is still here. And when he finds himself before a wall of stone, once part of a fortress now broken by age and ivy, he does not climb it. He only rests his hand against it and breathes and imagines what it once held inside and walks on, not because there is more to see, but because the world continues even in its quiet, and he has chosen to continue. With it the snow deepens, the air grows sharper, and Cale becomes slower, not weaker, but more deliberate, more aware of the way his weight presses into the earth, and the way his breath changes shape in the morning cold. He begins to speak more often now to the things around him, as if rehearsing the act of being known. He says today the birds flew low and the wind carried the scent of pine, and he says, "I think I will rest beneath that tree." And he says the frost is thick enough to hold my name if I press my palm into it. And then he does, and it does, and for a moment the world knows him again. He finds a cabin near a lake, its roof sunken, its windows broken, its door still hanging, and inside he finds nothing but dust and shadow. But he sits there anyway and builds no fire and lights, no lamp, and lets the darkness settle in around him like a blanket, like a song, like the arms of something that remembers him not as a soldier, not as a traveler, not as a tool, but simply as a man who once lived here and now lives again, if only for a night. He sleeps and wakes and walks, and each step carries more silence than sound, more weight than movement, and still he goes on until the line between journey and home begins to blur, until the world no longer feels like something to move through, but something to rest within. And finally he comes to a field wide and white and without end, and he walks into it until his footprints no longer press deep, until the snow holds him gently above the ground. And here he stops, and here he lays down, and here he closes his eyes and does not sleep, but does not wake either. He breathes and lets the air move through him, and becomes not a man, not a shadow, not a story, but a quiet shape in the stillness, a rhythm in the frost, a breath in the sky that does not need to end. And as you rest now, let this breath settle in your chest. Let the hush of Cale's final path ease your own steps into quiet. Let the snow fall soft around your thoughts, and the sky stretch wide above your dreams. This is the end, not of him, but of the journey, and in that ending there is no loss, only stillness, only peace, only the silence that remains when everything else has let go.